those comments in? I had no idea. To me, I thought it was like Granicus. They were in Granicus. There were reminders, and so I can punch on that comment. It'll take me right to it. So that was my intent, to be internal. I'm glad. I hope I didn't insult anybody.
Oh, no, no, no.
Yeah,
it was easy for us to answer, and that's why I said Francis tried to get on there, and it wouldn't let her in yesterday. So I said, okay, give me the questions, and I'll answer. And if he has more questions, he's going to say, hey, Rob, what does this mean? So I figured, I mean, we've got a good enough conversation between us that we can answer those questions.
all the answers were complete. It was great.
We will get, my goal is to get those trash cans ready to install it within the month.
Good. Do we have them? Do we have some of them?
I don't think, we have the money. I'm going to tell, I've already told him, I want him to order them. And we have staff that know how to do concrete.
Yeah.
We will do it.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you, we're going to move forward on it. I hate this dragging.
Yeah.
Excuse my French.
Imagine how I feel.
Yeah.
So,
And then,
because, I mean, we talk about how we treat our employees and everything else, and it's horrible.
and we have a great relationship with that HOA on Lucille del Sol. Pueblo Sol, and actually Elizabeth just told me that they were singing my praises the other night. So,
Terrence
we're working really good with that group. Robert, I don't remember his last name, is one of the folks, but they're really happy about. I told
Is this
them
on the park now?
on the playground. And I told them
Yeah.
what I need you guys to do is to pick a 2 to 5-year-old playground and then a 5 to 12-year-old playground. I said the thing is, you got to decide what colors are going to work for you because you don't want to go in with red and yellow if your community.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
So they're really happy about meeting. Robert came to our conference and met with the different playground people. So, and then he passed that on. So they're excited and we're working with them.
Are you ready, manager? Okay. Where's Brad? Do you want to send somebody for him? I'll ask if they want to even do it.
That'd be okay too.
You ready, counselor? Is it charged? Okay, let's see. Okay, so that green.
How are you?
So then what we got to do is we got to go into your settings. Well, put in your password. Okay, now let's go to your settings. How's it going? Yes. You're welcome. See, it should look good. Well, it should look good. It should find.
Hey, Vin.
It should go automatically. Thank you. So it should find this device. It should find your device. Oh, that's the problem. There it is. Yes. Let's see how that. I think so. Connected.
She's right.
Okay, so now let's see. Let's make sure. So just let's go to that and let's just see if it'll work. Yep, there we go.
How are you?
Good morning. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and take our seats so we could get started. We are in our third day of budget hearings, Wednesday, April 25th, at approximately 9:10 a.m. I would like a call to order, please. Yes, roll call. Present.
Here.
Okay, so under approval of the agenda, are there any changes from staff? Okay, so under the agenda, what we will do is we will go into staff responses for any requests from the past 2 days. Then we will discuss, we'll get into the, back into the department budgets. We have municipal court we still need to approve. We've got land use, parks and recreation, and then we have the, we'll continue the discussion regarding general government or the manager's office of the mayor's budget. Then we also have the question of the library and the funding for the library. At 9:30, we will have the attorney join us. At that time, we'll stop and we will have a discussion regarding positions and where it's appropriate for positions to be placed, whether they belong in the, or if they can go to the office of the mayor, or if they need to stay under the city managers. And then when we conclude that, we'll get back into whatever department budget we were in. Then we will go into public hearings, and then we will have the final approval of the operating fiscal budget for fiscal year 2018-19. The only other item that we need to determine whether or not we want an update on is the University of Art and Design update. Do we want to do that today or not? What is the pleasure of the committee? Councilor Romero Worth.
I'd like to if we have time,
Okay.
unless there's another place where we can fit that in.
So we will
Another setting or another meeting, I don't know.
Mayor, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think the committee's business is obviously priority, and that is actually doing the budget work. If there is, I agree with the Councilor Romero Worth, it's something that the council ought to be brought up to date on. Whether it needs to happen today in the context of this session really depends on how you feel about managing the time that we have, recognizing that we've got a council meeting tonight as well.
Well, if we do it, we'll do it last. We'll see. We'll take the temperature of the committee at the end, and we'll decide if we want to stick around for an extra 15 or 20 minutes for a presentation. So with that, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move for approval.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Okay, so the agenda's been approved. So let's, item number 4 is staff responses to requests for information. Manager.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I know Brad and the finance staff have been working feverishly late into the night and this morning to get a number of answers. I think there'll be some discussions as we get to the specific departments that have yet to be approved that might go more in depth. In the interest of brevity, Brad is going to run through the few specific answers that we have that can be quickly answered. And then again, if there's more that has to be explored as we get to those yet to be approved departments, we're happy to do that. But I'll pass the mic to Brad.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Chair, councilors. The first question was in the land use department capital outlay. It was for $70,000. That is for a vehicle.
Okay.
And that was a question, there was whether it was or not, and it is a vehicle.
And that is the vehicle for, do you know who the vehicle's for, or what division, or what they're, I mean, it's not a take-home vehicle, is it?
No, this is a large commercial to-do work type vehicle, is the way I understood it.
Excuse,
Okay.
one,
Councilor
so
Harris.
this is in land use, one vehicle for 70 grand?
That is correct.
I mean, and why does land use need, as you say, a large heavy-duty vehicle?
I may have the wrong department, but there was $70,000 line item for capital outlay. I thought it was land use, but it could be public works.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, if I may, the $70,000 is for 3 vehicles, 2 existing that we have budget for, and 1 new one. Yeah.
I like that math. Thank you.
Anything else regarding the vehicle request, the budget for vehicle and land use? Okay, Brad, go ahead.
The second one is salaries and benefits. And so this is just a general approach on how salaries and benefits were calculated. And it addresses the decline in Parks and Recs. And it also addresses the increase in land use. And so the overall process is we took the payroll number as of March 15th. Whatever was in the human resources profile on all the positions, all vacant, all authorized positions, whether they're filled or not, were calculated and put into a file. And that's where we start at. We don't start with what the payroll file was in fiscal year 17 or 18. It's what it was as of March 2018. We added 2% to all the salaries. And that gives us the general overall salary. At which point in time, a vacancy credit, and that means if there's 100 positions but only 90 of them are filled, on average over the year, those 10 positions are what their salary is calculated as a vacancy credit, and that is deducted from the salary total. And so that's total salaries. And then they apply whatever growth rates they wanted to health insurance, taxes, whatever, employee benefits. Whatever rate of growth is expected is put into that file at that point in time, and then a benefits dollar amount is calculated. Those same 10 positions, whatever those benefits are, those 10 positions we calculated for a vacancy credit, we also calculated a benefits credit and deducted that from the total. And so at the very bottom of it is a net number. In going through this, and this is one of the weird things, is that last year employee health insurance was citywide about $4 million more than the previous 2 fiscal years' actual expenses. And this year we're budget, and so in the current fiscal year, the budget for employee health insurance was $21 million. The 2 previous fiscal years, it was $16 million, $16.5 million, and then this fiscal, the proposed budget, it's $17 million. And so that $4 million, larger departments with lots of employees have a much bigger reduction in their health insurance, employee health insurance. That's sort of the overall methodology of how benefits were calculated. Now, when you get into the individual departments, it really has to do with how the employee file from a year ago compares to the employee file where we started at this year. And so if they filled a lot of positions, that's going to be reflected in a bigger number and a smaller vacancy credit. If they stayed flat, they should be fairly flat, except for the 2% raise and the whatever increase in benefits. So that's how we arrived at the personnel numbers.
Okay, and that would be in all the budget book and all the line items, salaries and benefits. And it's a calculation that finance did and not the individual departments.
No individual departments calculated it. This is purely finance and human resources working together. And it was, it's basically Vincent Montoya working with someone up in HR.
So we're not going to see a situation where a department lands up with excess in salaries and benefits that they can then distribute throughout the year in raises, or a department doesn't have enough and we're having to do a bar to move money in there.
If their vacancy rate is less than the vacancy credit, we're going to have to put money into that budget, just like we would have to any year. And if their vacancy rate is higher than the vacancy credit, they're going to have a surplus. And we would have to adjust out later. But those are just, we can't avoid those.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Chair. So I thought you applied a 4% for vacancy credit, 4% for personnel, and then 7% for benefits, rather than breaking it down discretely by departments.
When we started out in general, yes, those are the two numbers we started with. But in the analysis, the former finance director adjusted them to fit more like where the departments are actually at. And so some departments have higher vacancy credits and some have lower vacancy credits. But it's not a standard 4% and 7% across. The 7% is standard across the board for the benefits. But the salary, it varies from department to department. The percentage does.
Well, I don't doubt it, except in looking at the various notes departmentally, I'd only ever seen 4 and 7, but perhaps it's calculated in a different way and not, I don't need to see every note, but I just only ever seen 4 and 7.
And again, that's where, on average, that's about where we're starting from.
Okay, any other committee member? Councillor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brad, so you talked about the vacancy savings, and if people actually fill positions that they may have to look for money or need additional funding. Where does that money come from?
It would be looked at, if it's a general fund position, you would look for those revenues within the general fund. If it's an enterprise fund, we would look for money within that enterprise fund.
So the individual department who had 4 vacancies and decided to fill them all then doesn't have to adjust their budget from within to make up that difference?
Well, it would be starting off within on a broad categorization, you'd have general fund and non-general fund, but then you would want to have that department to fund it. Ideally, you would have it would come from within the department. You wouldn't want to do a department-to-department transfer unless one department has a lot of vacancy credits.
And I understand that, but it almost makes it, if you were a department director, you would be probably less willing to fill vacancies if you knew that you were going to have to rob from your own budget to cover that cost.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, just since I've been in the position of balancing this with the previous city manager as it relates to our department, the vacancy savings was always looked at something that's accumulative, that applies across the whole organization. And the theory is there are a lot of moving parts in an organization with 1,500 bodies. At any given point, that vacancy will probably equal out organization-wide. And as a matter of note, anytime we were trying to fill a vacancy, it absolutely had to go through the city manager's office. So there really was an air traffic controller, as it were, to try to time things appropriately so that vacancy savings, organizationally cumulative, was met the way it was intended.
So you as a department director were not having to then borrow money from one area to another to cover your salaries?
That is correct. It was done at a higher level.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councillor, yes.
I like the idea of honing in by department and trying to figure out personnel and benefits costs, because it appears to me that it's a more realistic way to budget. And when you find whether you have been accurate on the vacancy savings credits or not, that's what mid-year budget review is for, whereby you then assess how the vacancies were filled. And I hope that departments are allowed, even if they have a vacancy savings credit taken from their budgets, that they do fill those positions in hopes that they can justify, well, those are approved positions already, so they should fill them to do the work. And So I like that, and I think budgeting at mid-year and reviewing that is what the purpose is, not only for personnel and benefits, but for all costs. Secondly, I want to understand how you budgeted for temporary employees, because as I understand, the city does have approved temporary employees, and those continue with the budget, but of course you can't have them forever. And so I want to understand how you budget for those.
Chair, councilors, I don't know that answer specifically, but Vince showed me the database that he's working in, and so the positions say temporary.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's an active position, and it's whether it's filled or vacant, it's in the approved authorized positions. Those, we include all of them in the budget, all, and then we calculate a vacancy credit on top of that. So if it's an authorized position and it's temporary, part-time, full-time, as long as it's been authorized and it's approved, it's in these numbers.
Okay, and then I assume there's a slight separate calculation because the benefits would be different.
Correct. And Vince does all that in his database.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Next question.
Rent. Who pays rent? Elections, police patrol, criminal investigation, asset development, Convention and Visitors Bureau, economic development admin, DWI school, police, crisis response, parking, water, it has a little bit, water conservation, and SWAMA.
Okay. Councillor Harris.
So those are the divisions that are paying rent, correct?
That is correct. And what I've done is I ran a report on the financial, or the accounting system, and for the last 3 years, I can make this available to the council.
I mean, I think it would be good. I think we need to discuss it, and we won't settle it today, but you know, in previous budget discussions, you know, the last 2 years, I did not realize that certain divisions were, you know, were paying rent and others were not. So I guess I'd like to know, among other things, how is that determined? What are those numbers? And the one that really, you know, I have a hard time understanding is facilities management has a $260,000 hit on their budget for rent. And then yesterday, when we talked about it, what I thought I heard, it was for rent at Market Station is how it's described, and they're over on Syringa Road, but you said that $267,000 covered asset development as well as economic development and one other, maybe facilities. How did that come to be?
Because the facilities comes from the general fund, and so the rent, and so the other ones that they're paying rent for are also general fund, and so it just simply wasn't broken out to those other departments.
Right, but it really is not an accurate reflection of what they have to work with in the facilities, which I think is, in the best of circumstances, is underfunded. You know, we talked about, you know, $300,000 repair, major repairs for citywide facilities, which again is not enough. So again, how to get a true picture of the facilities management budget, I think it really confuses when you have a $267,000 draw against it. I mean, that's something I believe needs to be corrected, really. So, for instance, well, I don't know how you do it.
I agree, and we can go in and allocate that rent to whatever economic development's rent is. We can allocate it to economic development, and so we take money out of economic development, put it back into facilities.
I mean, again, Would you read that list again, please? Yeah, sure. But I just want to hear it one more time.
Elections, police patrol support, criminal investigation support, asset development, conventions visitors bureau, economic development admin, DWI school, police, crisis response, parking, water, water conservation, and SWAMA.
Now, the SWAMA is the lease on the land.
Yes.
So that's significant. If people are wondering, wondering why, but that's the lease on the land, and I was a part of that, and I know the details on that. I also thought that I saw Public Works was also paying rent in the budget. But again, I think this is something that we need to have some sort of policy about who and why, because it doesn't strike me as being consistent. If there's a method to your madness, or past madness, I should say, it'd be good to know, and I think we're probably going to need to work on it. Thank you.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Those agencies that you listed, how many of them are in Market Station?
There's 3 of them, asset development, economic development.
Okay, wait.
Yeah.
Let's start over.
Well, they paid $2,000 in rent.
To whom? To us.
To us.
And they are us.
Asset development, yes.
To us, by us. Back to the original question. Who is in Market Station of that list?
From what I see on this list, it's economic development and parking.
And do we know the amounts? Do they pay more than the rest of them?
On a square, it would be probably on a square foot basis. So
Okay.
It would be the same.
Okay.
Councilor Harris.
But again, yes, economic development's paying rent on Market Station, kind of, because it's a drawdown on facilities management budget.
Correct.
Makes no sense.
Do we want to give direction regarding this issue, Councilor Harris?
Yeah, I think at the very least, the department who is, for whatever reason, is being charged rent, it should come against their budget, at the very least. And then a longer-term policy, I think, we'll need to work on and certainly have it understood, I would say, at the mid-year review.
Okay. Mr. Manager, other questions?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Brad has a couple more. As soon as he gets this answer to my left, I don't have his list.
Okay, your next questions.
Oh, next question. Keith sent an email, Wilson, to the counselors regarding the bike and bus rebate. And so I'm assuming that I don't need to answer it here, that you all received the email? Okay. This is from Keith. Following up on Councilor Lindell's request on Bike to Bus rebate program. As outlined in Resolution 2013-60, the Transit Division staff was directed to develop a bus pass rebate program for residents of Santa Fe who acquire a bicycle or bicycle equipment by purchase from a participating bicycle vendor. And it lists a number of rules and regulations, and we can make this available. I mean, I don't know if you want me to.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, what
yes.
was the amount for that we budgeted that covers the rebate program?
The initial $50,000 in funding for this program was provided by CIP funds, originally intended for a study of bike share for the city. These funds were utilized for the design of Southside Transit Center by the Transit Division. In May 16, an additional $30,000 in funding was provided by the Finance Department for the program. These funds will be used to upgrade our security camera. To date, $80,000 allocated to the program. $70,340 has been expended through the distribution of passes. This leaves a balance of $9,660 remaining for the program. Based on the past years, we expect these funds will be exhausted by the end of the calendar year.
And so the following fiscal year, they've budgeted how much?
Nothing.
Why is that? I know that's not your job to. Did you all talk about this?
I just forwarded it to you. We did talk, I just flagged it because it is running out. There is not a request to renew the funds. And so the question is that something we want to do, should be doing?
Mr. Chair and councilors, we absolutely should fill that rebate. It's used quite heavily, and it's for people that don't have any other option for transportation. It's just a no-brainer in my opinion, and if you need more info, we could talk about it on the side, but I just think that that's one area that we shouldn't even really blink an eye at refunding. So I'm not sure where the money will come from, though. And I'm not sure why it wasn't rebudgeted or put in their budget for this year, because that's something that community members have always requested, not just community members, but I feel like the department itself saw the value of having that rebate program.
Thank you, Councillor Villarreal. So we already approved their budget. I don't want to go back in and relook at it. But so I guess what the direction could be is before the final budget goes to council, maybe the department could propose an amendment for that specific line item that we can consider at that time, Councillor Villarreal.
And I think we're looking at a number to start with would be 30 grand.
Okay. Okay, is there,
Mr. Chair,
Mayor?
I also think in compliance with a number of requests that have been made along the way, as part of that, it would be really useful to have a report on the program itself, its efficacy, its how it's been operated. I think there is a through line to these conversations that is very productive about, and I think Councillor Harris initiated it, that we really want to get this kind of closing of the loop when we're doing things. What's the, not just what's the intentionality, but what's the actual efficacy of these programs. And I think it's an important part of allocations, not just picking on one program, but across the board that we do that kind of feedback. And it'll be really useful for the governing body to say, as we make these decisions, we're doing it based on performance, and we can do some monitoring of across the board. I see this as something that increasingly is going to be a part of having the budget be a living document and a valuable way, a learning tool. So I'm not picking on anybody in this comment, simply saying let's make, in terms of your requests, Mr. Chair, for ongoing work to be done by the manager and the finance department, that's something we ought to just implement on an ongoing basis. It'll help us when we get to this 6-month review point, where we could actually have a series of updates, performance against intention, and I think that's a good item to come out of all of these budget conversations.
Yes, Councillor Lindell.
Thank you. Following up on the mayor, I've asked for a more complete report on this program, so once I get that, I'll share it with everybody.
Thank you.
And I just to follow up too, I suggested, Councillor Villarreal, that I think there are some tweaks that need to happen on this particular program. So your point, Mayor, well taken. I think, we need to be looking at these things that we're funding and not just blindly funding them without some evaluation and tweaking potentially.
Brad.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to confirm that the Public Works Director and the Fiscal Administrator for Public Works are both in this budget. There is question about the admin assistant, if that position is in the budget. But I will get further detail on that position. But definitively, Public Works Director and the Fiscal Administrator are in the budget, Public Works budget. The last question was the custodian. The only one we can confirm did actually get moved from the business unit of a consolidated group of janitors was the municipal court. That one was definitively moved to the courts. The other custodians have not been. And so it's still, it's going to be a bar next year to move the monies from the centralized facility maintenance back out to those departments because they did not get the custodial staff moved from one business unit to the next where they belong.
Okay, any follow-up regarding that? Okay, I saw the attorney here. Is he in the hallway or? Will you, okay, so will you get him, Mr. Manager, and tell him we're ready for him? And Councilor Rivera, I'm gonna ask you to kind of lead the discussion with the attorney because it was an issue that you brought up yesterday regarding positions and where they're appropriate, not only with our organizational chart but the charter itself. And so and then I'll open it up to questions from the rest of the committee. Yes, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Chair, the city attorney said if he could have a little bit more time to prep, he would prefer that we go to the next item on the agenda and come back to him.
Okay, so we'll put that on hold. Let's get into then the department budgets. What's that, Mr.? No, we're going to do the public hearings after we do the department budgets. So the first, we'll just take them in the order that the issues came up. Let's start with municipal court. When we looked at the budget for municipal court, in the budget book, and I'm on page 137, the city manager proposed budget was 1.7 million. The judge showed up and handed out her proposed budget, which showed 1.1, and then you look at last year's budget, both with hers, what she passed out, which was 2.3, and our budget book was 2 million. So we asked you to get together with the judge and come up with a budget. So what is it that's being proposed now?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so we did get back with the judge's staff, and there was some confusion on how the budget was presented. Brad and his staff did spend again last evening and this morning coming up with a budget proposal based upon last year's budget, both the expenditures and then ways to find the revenue to cover those expenditures. So Brad will now explain the results of that discussion.
In the original budget book, the budget was balanced with a $1.7 million budget for the municipal court. And that left the general fund with a $40,000 surplus. However, the municipal court would have a deficit of almost $400,000. So if their budget last year was $2,054,000. And we made the decision that while we'll include the custodial and the changes in salaries and benefits, the 2% change in salaries and benefits, the movement of the custodial staff over to it, and the changes in benefits, we held all other line items flat to last year. And so the total budget would again, it's a little bit higher than it was last year, and that's really namely due to the movement of the custodial staff and the 2% pay increase and changes in benefits. So the new budget would be $2,057,229.
Okay, and before I take questions from the committee, is the judge okay with that, or are you in agreement with what's being recommended?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak with you about this, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and staff. The question I would have, because I wasn't involved in the crunching of the numbers at this last minute, is we did request an increase to our pro tem judge budget. We requested an increase to mediators, and we requested an increase to our ankle bracelet DUI drug program. Does that include that request?
Chair, Judge, none of those were included in this budget.
Okay. I'm understanding you to say that's why we have a flat budget. I would like the opportunity, because we didn't have the opportunity to meet with staff before the Finance Committee to explain why the increase is necessary. There have been rules and regulations that we've had to comply with through the Supreme Court, and we do have an increase in DUI cases that are providing much more need from the services that our court has. So I really would like to advocate for those increases. I think without them, we'll be at a dearth for the needs that are required of the court today.
Okay, Councilor Romero Worth.
What is the total of those three things?
I do believe that I don't have it right in front of me.
And I guess, and I'm sorry, Judge, and the breakdown of each would be helpful.
And I hope Finance has that.
I believe the DWI bracelet was 30,000.
Mm-hmm.
The expansion for the judge pro tem or proxy was 25,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the third item?
It's the ankle bracelets, the BTs.
No, it was mediators.
It would be for the DUI program.
I don't have that. I'll have to.
And I'm sorry, my finance director. Do you have that, Jackie? And let me introduce her to those of you who weren't here. Jackie Baca is my deputy court administrator / finance administrator.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, councilors. So the increase to the contracts for pro tems is an increase of 20,000. The increase for BI Incorporated, which is the DUI ankle bracelet program, is 15,000 increase requested.
I'm sorry, 15 or 50?
15.
15.
Yes. And mediation, I believe, was 2,000. We're asking for an increase. And the last item was an increase to the DUI program for supplies, which we asked for 3,000.
Councilor Romero Worth, anything else?
So can we, just stepping away from this particular budget for a moment, it would be helpful to understand, I think, where we are. We took away, what was a little over 400,000 from one of the budgets for the recycling, right? 480,000.
Yes.
So that does give us some room, correct?
Mr. Chair, no.
Good. I'm glad I asked the question.
The municipal court is from the general fund, and environmental services is an enterprise fund, and we don't go back and forth.
Okay.
But you do bring up a good point, and that is we did have to find this $400,000 difference in the budget. And Andy Hopkins, within the Financial Planning and Reporting Department, has found that the money to bring it up to the proposed budget of $2 million. and it's from Fund 2116 Municipal GRT, and then also from the Municipal GRT GCC Parks Fund. They have a surplus cash balance, and we can use a cash balance per our rules and policy for a one-time purchase. And so that is how the Finance Department is proposing to fill this gap.
But, I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Councilor.
Chair. So are these one-time expenditures? Because we're not talking about these add-ons that we were just, we're talking about the gap between the judge's budget and what finance.
They are recurring.
So we're,
So the one-time cost would be capital outlays elsewhere in the general fund that we would use the money to cover those one-time capital expenses, but that would free up the money for the municipal court's operating expenses.
okay.
Councillor Harris.
Well, actually, I was going, because Mr. Flush and I had this conversation Monday night around the $480,000, and there I was thinking in terms, quite frankly, of the lifeguard program. And, you know, this, I received pretty much the same answer. Environmental Services is an enterprise fund. But we also talked about the policy, and there's a short paragraph in our budget book now that if an enterprise fund can meet its needs, this is going to be a global question I was going to have later on, to tell you the truth, but it can meet its needs, I'm paraphrasing, and has a 12% cushion, I think, then consideration can be given to moving some money into the general fund. Did I come even close to explaining that, Mr. Flush?
That is correct. It's page 11, item number 7, excess revenue from enterprise funds. And it spells out under what conditions the governing body can appropriate money from the enterprise funds to the general fund.
But that's not what you're proposing here that I heard you describe. There were some cash balances that were going to accrue to municipal court to get up to the number without the approximate $40,000. But you were not drawing down enterprise funds in any way. It was a different approach.
That's correct. We are not drawing down any enterprise funds. What we're doing is we're using cash balances within the Municipal GRT Fund 2116 and Municipal GRT GCC Fund 2121 to fund capital outlays.
Right.
And those will, and by funding those capital outlays with this cash balance,
right, it
will free up funds elsewhere.
I got that part. I just wanted to confirm that those were not enterprise funds. But it is a discussion I wanted to have and actually look at the Finance Department to look at the various funds to see if, in fact, we have room to move consistent with the policy that we just described on page 11.
Mr. Chair, and I've also reached out to the consultant, Jason Mumm, to have him do those calculations and find out where the enterprises are relative to that policy stated on page 11.
Okay, and can you give us an update when the budget goes before the council on that issue?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lindell.
Chair, I was just going to address the excess revenue from enterprise funds, but I think that I thought Councillor Harris was going to dig into that a little further at this point, but we can wait and have that discussion later, I think.
Probably so. I mean, I think the discussion I wanted was to know what balances might be available, and if you've already directed Jason Mumm to work on it, that's That's what I would be looking for.
I would only throw in a quick cautionary sentence on that we've been down that road before, and it didn't have a very sustainable ending for us. Let me put it that way. But it's a conversation that I know we need to have when we get that report.
Right. We have a policy in place. We're not just, being expedient about it, but in fact, I think it is worth looking at.
Councilor Rivera.
Judge or Jackie, just not sure if, so clearly it's a, fairly significant increase, not in the grand scheme of things, but are you able to kind of maintain until the mid-year portion where we can take a look at this again and try to find the monies either within your budget? Maybe you'll realize some cost savings in certain areas or potentially some revenue increases in others, and it'll buy us a little bit of time to try to find the $40,000 that you might need.
Well, and I really do want to defer to Jackie because she looks at the numbers far closer than I do. What I wanted to explain to the council is we've probably come to previous councilors with pretty much a flat budget, and that's probably been your experience and the municipal court's experience. However, things dynamically changed the last year. As of July 1st, the Supreme Court did impose the requirement for new bond rules. That requires me to use pro tem judges much more. We ran out of mediation funds this year, so those cases, instead of being mediated, which they should be, are being prosecuted at this point in time. So we don't even have the mediation funds to complete this cycle year. With regard to the ankle bracelets, we're looking now to see if we can recycle them in some way. I mean, we're looking for alternatives, but we are getting more DUI cases, and I think the numbers are apparent with the monthly reports that we give to you. So the dynamics of what the services that the court is providing have changed radically from previous years. I think it was very easy to come to the council for a flat budget, and I'm sure that finance is looking at the history of requests. This year has changed things radically.
Thank you, Judge. I don't doubt your needs and don't question your needs. It's just, can we maintain for a while? It's hard to find even $1,000 on the fly, I think, like this. So if we can maintain at least until the mid-year, then we can hopefully have some better ideas, and that'll give everybody some time to find the $40,000 that you need.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, I think that's an option for us because we can utilize the funds that we would currently be budgeted for in this coming fiscal year up to mid-year point of 18-19 and see if there is an opportunity for us to get additional funding that we're requesting.
And City Manager, Mr. Flitch, is that decent idea, something you think we can do?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I think it's a decent idea, and we'll have it on our list for discussion for mid-year.
Mayor, let me go to Councilor Vigil-Koppler first.
Good morning. Judge Vigil, I was going to ask, and you covered what would happen in the real world, in the courts, should you not get these funds. So you've answered many of those questions. I'm wondering specifically about mediation because, as you mentioned, if you don't have mediators to perform that, it creates quite a larger workload on the court to prosecute those cases. And that mediation, alternative dispute resolution, is the way I think the courts are trying to go. And I wholly support that. And I think, not being able to mediate just does create a whole pile of workload on the court, more so than just getting this over and done. Secondly, do you have enough ankle bracelets for the next 6 months?
The way the ankle bracelet program works is we purchase them as needed, and we purchase them, and then they actually have to be delivered to the courthouse. We purchase them from an outfit. We don't keep it on hand because we have to pay for them. Okay. So we purchase them, as I said, as needed. The problem with the ankle bracelet issue is that if I sentence someone to the ankle bracelet to get alcohol monitoring and we don't have one in hand, and there's some lapse in time that sentence isn't complied with, then we have a defendant who is non-compliant and also an offender that needs to be under the jurisdiction of the court through that ankle bracelet. So there's lapse in times with that, and I think that, just to sort of double up on the questions that have come up, I think we'd be okay in everything but mediation at this point in time, because we do have monies in each one of those items that we might work. It will mean for me that I will have to do more work on weekends because I won't have accessibility to pro tems as much as I'd like, and that's been required since the new court rules are there. But the ankle bracelets is something that I think we can work with. You know, I don't think it's a problem. I just want to make sure that we're secure enough with our budget that we're not lapsing the sentence far longer than what we should. And the mediation we have no money for. Those have all been prosecuted for a couple of months.
Okay, I just want to impress upon people that mediation is really a great shortcut to getting things done in a more quick and fair fashion. My concern about the ankle bracelets with the new Supreme Court rules about bonds is that if you don't have them, then you have a bunch of people loose without being trackable. So I would want to know that somebody is watching where those people are, because as you can see in the news, especially in Albuquerque, things happen when you can't track offenders. So, you know, good job, and hopefully we can find mediation money, it sounds like. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor. Oh, sorry, Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. So I went back into the municipal court operating budget, and I do see a line item here to substitute for the judge in her absence. This includes weekends due to the new Supreme Court. That's at $20,000. But it was at $30,000 last year. So I don't know if you were actually proposing to go from 30 to 50. Is that what you were proposing?
Yes. I believe it was, Mr. Mayor, City Councilor, yes. And that would create some reprieve for the pro tem responsibilities on the weekends, which never existed.
Yeah. So in your analysis, really, if you've only got 20,000 in there now, yes, I mean, at 30 last year, you're really $30,000 short in terms of where you wanted to be.
Mr. Chair, councilors, no, what we did is we put that 30,000 from last year is in this year's, what we've proposed as a solution. So they do, if you were to adopt this budget of $2,057,000, that would give them 30,000 for pro tem.
Okay. That would give them 30,000, and really you're looking at 50,000, a $20,000 increase.
But I just would underscore, I think the compromise here would be, let's see how we budget at midterm and review it at that point in time. These are all anticipated costs for us, so I think we'll have a better idea at mid-year.
I think that's a great approach. We've seen it work before, but I also want to note that contract for electronic monitoring and also the alcohol detection is at 30,000 now. It was at 15,000 last year. So,
okay. Anything else from the committee, Mayor?
I think Councilor Rivera has hit on a good solution, but it's also possible that we could come to some new understanding between now and the time the actual budget gets adopted. I think this, as I understand it, without having been party to this directly, of all the departments that were submitting budgets, for some reason this is the only budget where there wasn't an actual meeting between the finance department and the budget proposed. And that meeting has still never taken place. And so what's happened as of the budget arriving previously in our sessions, the budget team, the finance team has been scrambling to try to put together a way to overcome the deficit or the hole in the budget. Still haven't actually sat down to collaborate in coming up with some solutions. And so it may very well be that if we can simply have the committee suggest that such a meeting happen as quickly as possible with the effort to try to resolve any loose ends, we could have this tied up even before we get to the midpoint budget review. I think it simply requires a sit-down consultation to see if we can come up with some further refinements.
So does the committee want to not act on the proposed municipal budget at this time and just defer it to the bigger budget discussion at City Council? What's the pleasure of the committee? Councilor Harris.
Well, I think we need to affirm the revised number that Mr. Fuchs spoke. I don't, 2,059,000, something like that, which represents essentially a flat budget. But I think we can defer either at the midpoint or prior to that.
The 40,000.
The 40,000. Yeah, we've heard from the judge and Ms. Baca that they can make it work, but I think we'll give it serious attention. I have to believe we'll find it.
Okay, do you want to make a motion, Councilor Harris? Or is that your motion?
That was a motion.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, since we have is legal prepared? Okay, so we'll go back into the office of the mayor's budget, and we'll start with the discussion regarding the issues with positions and where they're appropriate to be. And then after we have that exchange between the committee and the attorney, then what I'd like to do is I'd like to get back into the mayor's budget, but I'd like to break it down. I'd like to have a separate discussion regarding constituent services and the two proposed positions. We'll act on that. Then we'll have a discussion regarding the neighborhood empowerment position and potentially take action on that. And then we'll have a third discussion regarding the council liaison position and potentially act on that. How does that sound? Councilor Romero-Worth.
Sorry, it sounds okay, although we might need to blend those three.
That's fine. I'm just trying to have some kind of order so that it doesn't get jumbled up. Okay, so I'm going to ask Councilor Rivera to start off the discussions with the legal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Zamora, we had a lengthy discussion about this yesterday, and as you know, the charter specifically says that the mayor's authority to hire and fire personnel is limited to the city manager, the attorney, and the city clerk. As it is right now, we've already hired a chief of staff, which I think by title and where that person sits is hired at the discretion of the mayor. So in some way, we've already added a position to those three that is not in the charter. So there's a request for additional personnel, more than just the chief of staff, of a neighborhood engagement director, moving constituent services under the direction of the mayor himself or herself, and then a city council liaison that would report, I believe, to the chief of staff. So the question was, is the mayor allowed, are we allowed to create positions under the office of the mayor when the charter is pretty specific about what the mayor can and can't do?
So, Chairman Abeyta, Member Rivera, the answer is not necessarily in the question, but more through the charter and how you work through a charter. One thing that I have said to Mayor Weber is this. You're dealing with, as a governing body and a mayor, you're dealing with a new charter with revisions from a charter commission that were then sent to the public for voting. It passed, and now you're implementing it. And you're about a month and a half, 2 months into implementation. What you're going to find is you're going to have questions. You're also going to find bumps in the road where maybe things should be done better. I do not recommend that there be a charter commission within the first year of this current election, but I do want to plant a seed in everyone's brain, the governing body, the mayor, the judge. Plant a seed that you might want to be keeping a side list of what you would like considered in the future to continue modernizing the city, to continue tweaking the changes. And it'll be a policy decision for the mayor's proposal, the governing body's proposal, possibly the judge's proposal for some of these tweaks and considerations to go back for a vote. So that's just a background. That's a quick background. To answer your question, Councilor Rivera, you are correct that the mayor's hiring and firing authority is very limited to 3 positions. Okay. You are also correct that the city manager, by both charter and some ordinance provisions, has the authority to hire and fire all other employees other than those, and other than the judge also. Mayor has no authority over the judge, and the city manager has no authority over the judge. But everyone else within the city manager has authority over. That creates tension, creates natural tension. So the judge may have a different position as to whether the CM should be in charge of the staff at the courts. The mayor may have a different opinion as to whether the CM should be in charge of all other employees. And same thing for the governing body. As the governing body considers, and I've heard this over the years, whether or not they have direct staff. Under the current charter, the governing body could put budget items in for staff to assist the governing body, the councilors directly. However, under the current charter, just as it is for the other branches, it's the city manager that's responsible for hiring and firing under the current charter. So in theory, if there was staff under the governing body, the city manager could hire and fire that staff, even if the council as a whole or an individual councilor says, no, I don't want you to fire that person. So we take, again, that second background and we apply it to the mayor. Whether staff is located within the office of the mayor or within a department, that staff is subject to hiring and firing by the city manager. And so someone like a chief of staff, subject to hiring and firing by the city manager. Certainly, city manager can consult with the mayor. The charter, as well as ordinances, give the mayor the authority to consult with the city manager prior to those decisions. But ultimately, it is the city manager. And theoretically, if you want to play this out to a worst-case scenario, there could be a disagreement between a mayor and a city manager, and the city manager says, I'm firing this person, or I'm not firing this person, and the mayor disagrees. The remedy for the remedy available to a mayor is to then fire the city manager. Okay, so all of that said, it's sort of a parade of horrors in some ways, but in other ways, that's how this charter gets implemented. And it's not unusual. It's not unusual to this governing body. It happens for cities that have this same structure, and a lot of cities have even different structures where, and I'm talking about small towns actually, where the mayor is given the responsibility for hiring and firing of all staff. And, interestingly enough, some mayors want that. Some mayors don't. because those EEOC filings, those lawsuits, are directly against that mayor and not against a city manager. One other place where this is not uncommon and where these questions and this tension is not uncommon is with our school districts. School districts have governing bodies, 5 elected members. By statute, they have 1 employee, a superintendent. Superintendent has every other employee. And it's a difficult conversation with the governing bodies every time. But so underneath the superintendent, there's always an employee that is assigned to the school board administrator, who answers constituent calls, arranges travel, does the agenda, all of these things. Obviously, that employee always becomes very close with the board, works closely, develops friendships even, and there are times that superintendents will fire the board administrator because they don't get along. And then the board's up in arms and says, that's our administrator. Under statute and under board policies, which are the equivalent of ordinance, it's the superintendent that hires and fires all. So it's a broader question, but I believe it answers the narrower question. The governing body has, the mayor has the authority to propose staff within the mayor's office. Governing body will certainly consider that as well as the budget, approve the budget itself on whatever terms. However, those positions in the mayor's office would be subject to the hiring and firing of the city manager only.
Okay. So you mentioned something about having to go back to or through the charter commission process to, I think you said, formalize any changes. Does that need to happen? I mean, we have a new form of government really here. Can we as a governing body, along with the mayor's office, whoever else might need to be involved, really sit down and define what the roles and responsibilities are of the new mayor's position, same with the governing body, and same with the city manager and deputy city manager, whatever upper management structure there is? Or do we have to wait for the voters to decide really on defined roles for the mayor's office?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, the short answer is no, you don't need charter revisions at this point in time. My introduction was, as you're getting used to the new charter, the new revisions, you may have questions. You may not like what the current conditions are, whether it's a mayor, a judge, or a council that doesn't like how it is, or you may feel that you're headed down a modernization road that needs a couple more tweaks, next steps. That's what I was talking about, is keeping a side list of, do we really need to come back? Are we finding that there are problems in implementation? Then we come back. But for what is proposed and what is before you today, there are no needs for charter amendment.
All right, so the idea of moving constituent services under the office of the mayor, that can be done, but they would ultimately still answer to the city manager.
It's a bit awkward, and that's where some of the tension is. But yes, so the mayor could propose a chief of staff, and the city manager could say, no, I've found one, and I'm hiring another chief of staff. Same with constituent services and employees. And there will need to be awareness of these issues when it comes to evaluations, et cetera. Does the mayor have then the responsibility to do the evaluations of just those 3 employees defined in the charter? I'd like to think through logistically that much further, but it's going to be strange to say, but this is just the current conditions. With those employees, the buck stops with the city manager. And so how we implement it to remain consistent with the charter and ordinance authorities, we'll just have to be mindful of that. But I can't tell you exactly what the process would be.
Okay, thank you. I think that answered my question.
Wait, point of clarification though, those three positions being the city attorney, the city manager, and the city clerk, those don't stop with the city manager, those stop with the mayor.
That is correct.
I think you misspoke, or I misheard.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilor Romero Worth, let me clarify, and I apologize if I misspoke. The mayor has authority over 3 employees. The city manager has authority over everyone else. And I'm not putting the judge in that category because the judge is an elected official.
Okay, any other questions by the committee? Councilor Romero Worth.
Do you need to leave? Can we go to discussion because
Yes.
that we may need further clarification or further validation of how
Yes,
we're going to.
that's why I wanted to get into
Yeah, so I don't have particular questions at this moment, but we might.
We don't want you to leave.
I'll be at the back of the room.
Actually, sit in the front of the room because I think we're going to have. Councilor Vihel-Coppler, did you have a question? Okay, so I want to start with the constituent service liaison positions. Mayor, you are proposing 2 additional. As I understand the existing makeup of the office, we have a constituent services director and 2 liaisons or 1.5. Because you
Sorry,
said
could
one.
you repeat the question?
So we have the existing office is a constituent service director.
Yes, sir.
Then you have, then my question is, do we have 2 constituent service liaisons or 1.5? Because you said one was at Market Station, and I mean, is she just housed there? Is the full position dedicated to constituent services?
Let me describe to you what is happening. I don't actually know how it is budgeted. The actual on-the-ground reality today is that we have the director who is here in this building and 1 full-time person in this building, another person who is in the Market Station building who doubles up as both the, I'll say, receptionist or greeter in that building and also a constituent services person. So on the ground, in terms of actual time on task, as it has been described to me and as I think people experience it from the public, we effectively have 2.5 people. And
Plus the director.
No,
Well, 2.5, including the director.
The director plus 1 full-time and 1 person whose responsibilities are divided between the person at the front desk also being a constituent services person.
And would your intentions for that half, if it's totally budgeted right now as a constituent service person, would your intention be to find somebody else somehow through somebody else's budget to handle that front desk and bring that position here full-time, or are you going to keep that as a kind of a part-time position?
I was assuming that the need is as it is and that we would continue with that to try to meet 2 needs at the same time, and that these 2 additional positions would simply beef up our response to public concerns and make people available to respond, and not only to respond, but as I tried to describe yesterday, to be more proactive in not just waiting for the phone to ring, but to go discover concerns that are in the community that we could try to address before the phone rings.
So we'd be looking at 4.5 positions then?
Yes, sir.
And you're requesting that those positions be located in the office of the mayor or under the office of the mayor?
Well, this is I think I may have muddied the waters, but I'm prepared to. What I was describing was a going forward mindset of how I think responsibility could be more directly located, putting the buck for being responsive in the mayor's office. But the fact is, the positions are really what's important at this point in time. Getting a much greater capacity to have that office functioning not only at full full levels and not missing calls, not being unable to take calls, and also being in an outreach position, to me, that's the first priority. Second question is, as we envision this other issue about reporting relationships, it really is a secondary issue. It's not actually contained in the budget document itself. That is to say, the budget, we're looking at a wide number of changes going forward about how the organization chart works and functions. And as Councilor Harris pointed out yesterday, the organization chart that we have at the front of the budget book is something that is problematic for all of us. And so whether we take up now where that, I haven't seen in the conversation up to date in any other department the issue of reporting relationships, even though people have said, why is this department in this, why is this division in this particular department? Those have been flagged on an ongoing basis, but we haven't been moving the organization chart as part of the budget. I was simply describing to you my going forward thoughts about how to make the responsiveness much more clear and direct, and to assume the personal responsibility to you to deliver on my promise to you that if you work through that office, we will make sure that the work gets done, and I will take the personal responsibility for that. But frankly, that probably muddied the waters about whether or not these positions are really useful, important, needed, because to me that's really the issue on the table, is do we agree as a body that we are going to be much more user-friendly, much more public-facing, and that these positions would enable us to do that.
Now, am I correct in understanding that these actually weren't proposed as expansions, though, because we were reclassifying existing positions? So technically, the Finance Committee doesn't even, I mean, you could do this with or without Finance Committee authority or council authority, because you're just reclassing two positions.
Well, the city manager could.
Right.
Yes. But
and my reading of the HR rules and regs, Hill Koppler, I got a copy. It is clear that you can read the manager, and the manager can reclassify positions, and they don't have to come to the council, because it's assumed it's budget neutral because you're taking an existing position and reclassifying it.
That's how we propose to go about this. But I think in the context of the conversation we've had over the last several days, I think it's a very healthy dialogue about what I, at least as the mayor and with the responsibility to be part of the budget process and to advise the council where I think I'm trying to go in meeting my personal agenda for the future. And as Councilor Rivera pointed out, commitments that I made in the course of running for this office, I'm trying to be as transparent as possible so that everybody knows how I see the administration of the mayor's office moving forward. And I don't know if the city attorney wants to address this now, or if you all want to even go into it, but the question that the Councilor Rivera raised about roles and responsibilities, I think, is a complicated one, and it's a textured one, and it will evolve over time. But to some extent, the notion that the mayor has this executive authority, this chief executive responsibility to lay out a vision and a strategy and a direction as mayor, and then it's the responsibility of the city manager to be to execute on an agreed upon agenda with the legislative policy oversight and direction of the council, strikes me as the texture of where we are today. And I'm not entirely sure. I think what we're doing is using one very small example to try to extrapolate a much larger issue. And I'm fine with that, but I think it's actually a very small example rather than a deeply, this is not a constitutional crisis where we're trying to figure out whether the mayor is somehow encroaching on the policy responsibilities and authority of the council. It's really an attempt to execute on a way to make the city operate more effectively on behalf of the citizens. And I do believe that on an ongoing basis, this dialogue is really healthy. I don't want to in some ways, bid our hands in terms of just what's at stake with this particular proposal.
Okay, let me open it up to the committee. Councilor Romero Worth.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'd like to propose a solution. Sure. For conversation. I'm just digesting everything I've been hearing. Yeah, so let me propose an idea. So what happens if we don't move constituent services into the mayor's office? I just think it can stand outside of the mayor's office. And therefore, it's understood that they still have to, that the city manager is still who they respond to. But then it seems like it's more clear that that office needs to be responsive both to the council and to the mayor. And I think that the mayor wanting to be held accountable for the constituent services operation is admirable, but in fact, he is responsible because it's his agencies and how they run under constituent services that are really tied directly to him through the city manager. So I don't think that whole office needs to be in his office in order to hold the mayor accountable for the operation of city government. But I think it is really important for the council to understand and for the constituent services people to understand that we are equal players in all of that. And again, I would ask us not to think about the personalities that are sitting around here, but to take this into a more theoretical realm, realizing that we might not all always be so collaborative and good-feelinged and whatnot, and how would the structure work under a different set of circumstances. So I guess I just want to say I feel very strongly that constituent services remain outside of the mayor's office. I do absolutely agree that we should be beefing that group up to do as the mayor has suggested, that we become more user-friendly, more responsive, and actually even more proactive in the sense that, maybe we find problems before we get complaints about them. I think that's a really admirable and tall order, but, we should strive towards it. So, and I guess, in another conversation I was having this morning, maybe it needs to be clear that there's one or two people in the constituent services office whose primary responsibility is to be responsive to the council. And so in that sense, maybe the council doesn't need its own person. I also feel strongly that assigning a council liaison to all 8 of us to share, we're just setting ourselves up, I think, for failure, that a revolving door. I just think that's just too tall an order. So we either need to staff the council appropriately, and we could discuss lots of models for that. We could look at the county commission, and they all have their own people. We could look at having one person per district that we share. We could look at having 2 people that's shared between 2 districts. There's lots of ideas of how to do that. But maybe given the budget constraints at this point, maybe what would be better to do is just beef up constituent services, keep it outside of the mayor's office, and make sure that in the job description, 2 of those constituent services people's jobs are to be responsive first and foremost to the council. And that's, I think, yeah, where I am at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Harris.
So I agree with Mayor Weber when he says there's a longer discussion here. This is a small element, and I think we should be able to solve it pretty quickly. And I accept the mayor's representation of why he wanted to have it under his office, and it really has to do with commitments he's made and his own personal feeling and accountability. However, so I would support the constituent services additions, and I would also structurally think it'd be more appropriate to keep it under the city manager's office. However, it shows up in the organization chart. You know, I am, you know, then Councilor Romero Worth went on to describe kind of how best to support. After 2 years, I do feel a need to have some additional support. In the constituent services, if that's whether there's an individual who within that group who's assigned for councils, I don't really care about that so much. But I feel a greater need just to kind of the research and the policy side of things. As you've said, you know, that is, you know, at a very high level, that's our role. I, quite frankly, struggle with that because, you know, I mean, I have more time, quite frankly, than many others on this council, and I can't imagine how they feel. But it's, I feel like we need to support. The council needs support, you know, with some expertise. I mean, we turn to legislative services, but there's a lot of people competing for attention for Mr. Guillen, and we've had some staff turnover, and as good as Mr. Guillen is, and I believe that he is, you know, he, for instance, came up short the other night when we were talking about the hearing officer and things like that. So I would still want to continue the discussion about how we can provide some resources to the council that will really get us to the point where we can operate at the level that we're supposed to. You know, I happen to like, in fact, I've said many times over, working with my constituents in District 4 is the best part of the job. But I also know that I'm having a hard time keeping up with that part of the job. So.
Thank you. Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I think that, you know, I don't want to overcomplicate this. It's like the mayor said, I don't feel like we're at a constitutional crisis here. I think in this moment we're looking at some positions, and I don't know that it's imperative that at this moment we do a reorganizational structuring of everything. I think as part of the Finance Committee, we want to allocate the budget, and it can be a much more in-depth, longer discussion of the council or the Finance Committee. I think that, you know, we could go till 4 this afternoon easily on this because I agree with Councilor Romero Worth. She brought a couple of points to me in a conversation that we have a governing body right now that genuinely enjoys working with each other. We have plenty of disagreements, but we have an underlying collegiality amongst us. And the future doesn't present itself to us until it does. And it may be that we would set a path for a council 8 years from now to have just horrid battles within the council and with the mayor's office and with the city manager's office. And that's certainly not what we want to do. I do want to say that I appreciate very much that the mayor is talking about executing and taking responsibility. I mean, that's we're not talking about high-level policy here in terms of constituent services. We want to serve our constituents in a meaningful way and to have new policies and procedures of how that happens. And it doesn't just happen by saying, okay, we're going to do better. It's a whole cultural change of how these calls get handled, what the time frames on them are. We're putting more on employees that are already extremely busy. It's like, well, make this your number one priority. Well, you know, I've already got a day's work set. And it's also setting policy and procedures for the council. I agree with you, Councilor Harris. Sometimes elbowing our way into Mr. Guillen's office is, I mean, we don't have a policy and procedure of how does that work get put in line. It seems like as a council, we can have a policy of how that works and a procedure and in fact a courtesy to each other of how that works, which we haven't always had in the past. So I think we're all headed in the same direction. I'm concerned though that to try to figure this out right now, Chair, my inclination is to go ahead and pass a budget that funds these positions and to have a much longer conversation about how organizationally these fit in and where they go. But to try to do that in the next half hour doesn't seem realistic to me. I'm completely supportive of the new positions, and I will vote to support that in this budget. And I will also be willing to sit and have a much longer discussion with the council, with the finance committee, perhaps with the other members of the council being willing to come and join in on that discussion. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the constituent services positions that were proposed, and I'm not going to keep going on, but I agree with Councilor Romero Worth and with Councilor Harris.
Thank you. Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wasn't in the discussions and about the vacancies, and there's 8 that you are talking about. What 8 vacancies are there?
It might be easier just to talk about how much money those vacancies.
Well, the reason why I ask about the vacancies is because I don't think they're all under the mayor's and city council, city manager's office.
Okay.
I think they were pulled. My assumption is they were pulled from other departments.
They were identified. In the work of putting together this proposal, the then city manager and then budget director identified 8 different vacancies in a variety of different departments. The average vacancy was 2.2 years, over which time they had been left empty. There were 8 of them that totaled about $594,580 in salaries not spent. We were informed that the calculation done by the then city manager and budget director said if we combined 6 out of those 8 positions, depending on which ones you chose based on need or perception of need, we would reach our goal of the 4 positions that were proposed to be in an amount of $422,092. So we were willing to sit down with the approval, with the go-ahead approval of the Finance Committee and the council to work out the details to figure out exactly how to consolidate those positions and fund these new positions using those empty positions, as the chair pointed out, working within existing budget constraints.
So do you have a list of the departments or the positions?
I have a tentative list, but I think in the time that we've started this conversation with, in the budget hearings, there's been some changes, but they range from a project leader in the IT department to positions in the city clerk's office that have been empty. I got a message this morning from there are 2 unfilled positions within the city clerk's office that have been unfilled for some time that could be reclassified. So my sense is that it's really not a question of whether there are such positions, but which ones, if we approve these new positions, we would actually utilize most effectively with the working through with the city manager to talk to department heads where there would be a way to do it that would meet with their approval as well.
The reason why I ask that is because we have departments that have had vacancies, but they haven't filled them because of our budget constraints, partly. Some may just, I don't know. I guess I just feel like there's a bigger holistic picture that we start to pull from other departments, and they're like, oh, there's a vacancy, there's a vacancy, there's a vacancy. But we're not even looking at maybe what that vacancy means for that department, and maybe they're not running full 100% with their team because of that vacancy. And I guess my concern was that when we had all these vacancies, it wasn't because we didn't need those positions, it's because we had a deficit. And I don't know if those got cleaned out completely. I know we kind of scoured and scrubbed as best we could, but in the end, it ended up hurting other departments because they were still running with less staff. And I guess I'm just cautioning us to think about that, because I don't even know how to begin to dissect that. And I know we need more constituent services folks, and I'm not opposed to that. It's hard for me to hear from other departments that there's needs and they're having staff take on the loads for, or take on extra because they don't have enough staff to really completely run their department. So I'm just telling you that, and I know other counselors know about this. It's just really challenging for me to think about 8 positions that don't get filled because I don't know why. I just don't know enough about it.
On that point, I mean, the other thing is we've heard we have a lot of interims and actings, and so maybe these positions aren't getting filled because there's nobody at the helm who can build out the department to do the work that they need to be doing. So I think it's an interesting point.
And then there's this other flip side that we know there's quite a few jobs out there that we're trying to fill at the city that aren't being filled. I can't remember what Lynette told us the last time. I feel like it was like 150 jobs that weren't filled, that were out there, they were posted, and we just hadn't been able to fill them for whatever reason. I don't know if that's still the case, but there's that issue too. So I guess I'm just cautioning us. I don't really know I don't really want to be like, well, what about that? What about that? And I'm just warning us, cautioning us that it gets complicated when we're trying to pull positions from other places to fill an administrative, the administration. So, and then the other thing is, I'm hoping you thought about this, but Celeste does quite a bit for the council, and she fulfills that role that maybe because we haven't had a constituent services person assigned to us. And I don't know if you all thought about that. And I don't even know, I'm not going to speak for Celeste. Maybe she doesn't want to do what she has been doing for us and it's extra load for her. Or maybe she loves it. I don't know. But so we appreciate her, and she very much fills that gap that we are trying to, cover. So when we look at these positions we're adding, do we take that into consideration? And is there, is the city manager office going to look differently? And does that mean Celeste has other things that will be on her plate? Or is she still fulfilling the role? And then how does that then duplicate some of the support you're talking about for these new positions? I guess I'm trying to prevent us from having duplication of support, which I don't know if that even exists really, but the fact is there's somebody that's already somewhat doing that for us, and then we're adding another position, and well, 4.5, but I don't know. I'm wondering if your team thought about that and have talked to Celeste, and maybe she comes over to our side and becomes our constituent liaison, but...
Oh, no. No. If I hear you correctly, you're attempting to do an immediate reorganization of personnel, having just told us that you don't want to get into the personnel business. I think what you're pointing out is completely, all kidding aside, and I appreciate the chance to have some levity in the middle of a serious conversation, so I'm not taking it lightly. I think the positions that go into the Constituent Services Office are really, I think if we just hone in on what those are about, they're exactly what Councilor Romero-Worth said, which is we've all, I think, experienced in our work the requirement to be more focused on the needs of constituents, not only to respond to issues, but to be out among the people in the community to hear what their concerns are and to act to prevent the concern from rising to the level of a complaint. So if you were to strip this down to its basic, the basics of the request, it is simply let's respond to that need. Let's add those positions. Those positions would, regardless of issues of reorg, which is really not on the table, it's not really appropriate to have it on the table, and I take responsibility for having simply put out my own thinking as a way of exposing how I was in my own managerial mindset thinking that we would achieve a higher degree of responsibility and accountability. Put that to one side. If you think that the city needs to be much more aware of, conscious of, responsive to constituent concerns, then you will vote that we should add these positions into the Constituent Services Office. It really doesn't touch the person who is supporting the city manager. It really doesn't change the operations of the Constituent Services. It simply says we want to add these positions and we'll find the savings to make it happen so it's revenue neutral. That's, in the way that the chair divvied up the discussion, that's the first item that you were seeking to address, if I understood the way you were trying to organize an internal agenda. And so at some level, that's the question that's on the table, is if you think that's what we ought to be doing as a governing body, I'm asking your support to do that. The question of Celeste's responsibility, and in fact, we've already agreed, as per the conversation of the city attorney, that the hiring of those positions is really up to the city manager, not to me, or any other mayor in the future, who you may or may not like. Or you may or may not like the current mayor. So we'll hold that for the 6-month review. But I think at the moment what we're really talking about is, do we believe that allocating those resources to these two positions right now is something that the Finance Committee wants to support? I think I did muddy the waters with issues of reporting relationships and organizational structure. I think we do need a reorg. I've said this publicly for 6 months, that when you look at our current organization chart, a lot of it, if we were to peel back the why question, why is it the way it is? It's actually not based on either efficiency or effectiveness. It turns out it's based on exactly what Councilor Romero-Worth is warning us against, which is who happen to be the department heads or the division heads or the people who aren't playing well with each other, and so the org chart was moved around to deal with matters of the moment rather than matters of logic or efficiency or effectiveness. And so I'm committed to saying we ought to take a look at that, but not in a budget hearing, and not as a matter of looking at two positions. I think it's not what's on the table right now.
Anything else, Councillor Villarreal?
No, I wasn't trying to add in my opinions about who should be hired. I just want to make sure we acknowledge that we actually have someone right now that had been helping us, assisting with us, and hopefully, and I'm actually supportive of those constituent services positions, but I hope that they then somehow collaborate, partner with the city manager, assistant, whatever that looks like, and whoever that is. So, thank you.
Duly noted, and I think that's what I'm hearing are a lot of suggestions about how to do this better and how to make it work better for everybody, and I think those suggestions are welcome, and I know that my colleague to my left, our city manager at the moment, is taking notes to be sure that we can revisit this once the budget. This is a living document, and so your instructions are how to keep it alive and make it function more effectively.
Councillor Vihil-Coppler.
Thank you. I would say, my sense is, and we all know, we're all in a whole new ball game here, and certainly I know we're getting used to everything. I totally support what you're trying to do in constituent services, and I think it's important, though, and I apologize, I don't know the big detail from yesterday's discussion with regard to exactly where these positions are coming from, but first of all, I don't really like robbing Peter to pay Paul, so if we're using a bunch of vacancy savings to fund these at the expense of the departments who have long been waiting to fill positions. We all know what happened with not filling positions. The weeds grew, the recreation centers got understaffed, Parks and Rec didn't have what they needed, and that is a direct result of not filling positions. So whether this vacancy savings credit is accurate or not, I think, well, we've known too that previous councils have funded new endeavors, be it buildings or programs, and didn't fund maintenance. So, what we're seeing is a backlog of maintenance, not only in structures, but in parks, in all of those places. So I would like to see this council, approve a budget, but not at the expense of the lack of maintenance that we've needed, not expense of filling positions that we've needed to do the work, because we have had a great public outcry, and I don't think any of us want that in our terms. Staff, it's very difficult for them to work under these conditions as well. So I would say, because it's a new ball game, we ought to let our departments fill their positions, get the backlog of things done, and have you and the city manager bring forth the constituent services positions, whether you have vacancies to fill those, to create those positions or not. If it's important enough, then maybe we ought to add to the FTE and fund those, and then see what's going to transpire in the future. Because we're not going to get out of this hole that we've dug in the past by not funding things. It may look good on paper, but then it may not be real in practice. So with that being said, more specifically to the constituent services, I welcome that, because it is quite daunting with all the calls we've been getting and the emails, and then, the things that we ourselves need to respond to, and when we don't call people back, and we don't do that because, things happen or they don't like, it needs much further work. We do need somebody that we can rely on for that. And I very much appreciate how the constituent services is working now. When I send something there, boy, they're on it. And I'd like to give kudos to the staff who's done that. So if we add more people like that, I think it would be good for all of us. And I believe, though, it's important to make sure that somebody looks at those job descriptions to include, I'm not even sure I haven't seen one yet, but to include what these positions' duties are going to be and the relative duties they will need to be doing for us. And so as long as it's in their job description, it doesn't matter who tells them what to do. They're hired to do that. Now, there's much to be said about having good management. So when you have good managers that understand the roles of their employees and understand how to manage, I think some of the concerns that have been raised here will alleviate themselves, because a rose by any other name is still a rose. It doesn't matter who you report to. If you're doing your job well, then you're okay, and you're going to satisfy the people that you're reporting to. So because the city manager will supervise and manage this group of people, it is important that the employees understand they can only be responsible to one master. So the city manager, I think, is key in making it clear they respond to the city manager, but a good city manager will hopefully prioritize among all of us by communication what we're directly giving to the employee in order not to micromanage them. So that's going to create a good relationship. Thirdly, I don't know if these positions are going to be classified or exempt, and my sense is they probably should be classified, because you don't want to keep having turnover every election, and then you lose a lot of the history. And so that is what I propose. And so back to the original point, I think it's very important to have positions funded that serve this purpose for the city manager, for the public, because many of the things we're going to give them are to help the public, and that's what we need. And I would then again reiterate that I don't really think we're serving a good purpose by robbing Peter to pay Paul necessarily, by taking vacancy savings away to fund positions where we're going to damage and still be behind on a backlog of work that needs to be done in the departments. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. And on that point, real quick, I just want to make it clear. I think that was probably part of the evaluation you did when you said we have these vacancies. It's not like you saw a job posted on the board and said, hey, wait a minute, take that off. I want to take that position and create a constituent service liaison, right? I mean, I'm assuming these positions probably weren't filled not because there wasn't budget, but because maybe there was no longer a need due to technology changes or internal reorganizations that took place. Because like the other counselors, I certainly don't want to support positions that are for us if we're taking away from other areas of the city where they're needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and very much appreciate your comments, Counselor. A couple of thoughts. The chairman's assumption is right, and it is how we, in my experience, brief as it is with the prior city manager and our current administration, we're working through to make sure we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. That would be really ill-advised. It's also true, your point about things like weeds and other things. We heard efforts being made right now to fill empty positions in parks and recreation to make sure we don't end up in that situation. So they're not being constrained from doing that work, and we're all painfully aware of what happens when it isn't done. And I know that under the previous city manager, there was an enormous amount of oversight and effort to work through a plan that would really make sure that we are in good shape. You may remember that recently there was a very strong announcement of how the weeds and preparation for this season were being done ahead of time, and I'm assuming that work continues, and I'm getting a nod that suggests it does. On the point about maintenance of city facilities, again, that's absolutely correct, and it's an ongoing concern. It's a concern that I've really only become increasingly aware of in the short time I've been in the mayor's office, but we have so many facilities. We have so many buildings that we're responsible for. We're spread out over so much capital territory over the years that we've actually built in inefficiencies and some serious, I guess what Councilor Harris was talking about in terms of a day of reckoning at some point the other day. You were describing the notion that we at some point have to really come to terms with whether or not what we've been handed over as the legacy of investment in property and buildings and maintenance and upkeep is really what we think we ought to be doing going forward. It's what our Office of Asset Management has been trying to wrestle with in terms of the disposal of excess property, whether the market is ready to buy it or not. We're trying to make sure we begin to right-size the city's capital holdings. The maintenance part, I'm getting nodded affirmation from, would actually be appearing in a capital improvement budget, so that what we're doing here really is not impeding the ability to look hard at whether we're using our maintenance and upkeep in the capital budget. And there's been talk about going forward in the relatively near term with some sort of measure we take to the public about a capital improvement, another capital improvement bond that would look at some of our really overlooked improvements, not only to things like buildings, but other fundamental capital improvements for the city. And that work is in progress. It predates my arrival that they were looking at trying to put such a list together. So I think your points are really well taken, and on the point of, have we looked at doing not doing harm by adding to an area where we all agree there's a need to be more attentive? The answer is yes.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Landau, and then we got to still talk about the neighborhood engagement position.
Maybe we should talk about that prior to, because I was ready to make a motion, so.
Okay, do we
want to have that discussion?
Do we want to have a discussion, or do we generally are in support of that idea, that position, or do we want to get more information regarding the neighborhood engagement position?
So,
Councilor Romero Worth.
I just want to be clear. We have three things I think we need to vote on. So it's adding 2 people to constituent services.
Yes.
It's this neighborhood position.
Yes.
And it's adding somebody to liaison with the council.
Yes.
So I just want to be clear, because I think the conversation going around the dais was mostly as to constituent services and not to
yes.
the support of the council, which, again, I on that point, I think we need to maybe postpone and look at how we support the council, and then maybe move forward on the other 2. Just a thought.
Okay.
Clarify, Councilor, I didn't follow that.
I'm just wondering, so from where I sit, I think we ought to approve the 2 constituent services people.
Yeah.
I would love to give some sort of direction that maybe we ask that 2 of them be responsive to us. Then we need to decide what to do with the neighborhood person, and I'm wondering whether we should postpone adding the position for the council until we figure out how best to support the work of the council and what the possibilities might be there in terms of what we need and what the budget constraints are.
Okay, on the neighborhood engagement position, is there anybody on the council that's opposed to that? Councilor Harris.
I hate to vote in favor of something I truly don't understand. That's the problem I have with it. It's just not as defined as much as what I think is necessary.
Okay.
So that's the issue I would have.
Councilor Rivera.
I think I agree with that. Not really sure how it's going to work, how it's going to fit, what the roles and responsibilities are going to be. Still a lot of questions with the neighborhood engagement, and don't think that one liaison, if we're going to talk about that as well, would best serve this council.
Okay. Councilor Lindell, did you have any thoughts on the neighborhood position?
No, I really don't. I was willing to support that as part of what the mayor brought forward as his agenda, and that, as Councilor Rivera had talked about yesterday, it's something that he campaigned on, and I'm willing to wait on that. It sounds like we're willing to go ahead and vote on the budgeting on the two constituent services people. I personally would like to include some kind of a council position, whether we call it a council liaison or if it ends up being another constituent service person that's directly responsive to council. I would just like to get it included in the budget. I think if we don't, then I don't see how we come back or when we come back and do that, and I'm concerned about it. So that would be my preference, is to clearly look at those three positions and voting on budgeting them. And I would also say that the idea of robbing Peter to pay Paul, some of these vacancies have been around for a very, very long time. And there's never been any intention of filling them. They've just been placeholders in a budget. And we've gone through that. Like Councilor Villarreal said, we did scrub a bunch of them at one point in time to get out of that $15 million deficit. But, I mean, this comes down to, we try to do a huge amount with a limited budget. So we can either reallocate monies and set our priorities, or we can look at increasing revenue. And that means increasing taxes. No one wants to talk about it, no one says it, but to continue to take on more and more and to expand here, to expand a little bit there, we have a set pot of money right now. And we need to be realistic that expanding and not expanding our income doesn't make for a balanced equation. So you just can't have it both ways. So those are my thoughts. I would like to see minimally these three positions funded.
Okay. Well, I would support all the positions, and the reason why is because I think that like the council liaison position, the neighborhood engagement position, I think can be defined as we go forward. But I would like to see them put in the budget so that we can start that definition, because like you, I agree, we won't get to it. We won't get there. And we've got a lot of organizations that have organized themselves, quite frankly, because of the lack of response they've gotten from the city. And I think that's part of the reason we need this neighborhood engagement position, so that they appoint somebody in the city that they can go to, instead of having to pick us off individually with whatever their issues are. I do believe with the council liaison position, I think Councilor Harris actually sold me on it when he talked about we have the gentleman up in legal that we kind of rely on and overwhelm with that. And I think that we could do a much better job coordinating those efforts if there is another position. And quite frankly, I think that the mayor had a platform. I think it's not unreasonable to expect a mayor, when he first comes into office, to propose some type of organizational changes in order to try to implement that platform. I think that's what the voters expected when they voted for him. And I think this is his first attempt at being responsive to them. And so I personally support all of the positions. I think we can define them. The other thing with the neighborhood engagement position, we need to create a focus on the short-term rental issue. And that's something that affects neighborhoods in districts 1 and 2. And that could be a area that this individual focuses on right away. So I think there's lots of work for this neighborhood engagement person. And so I'll finish with that. But I would ask the committee to consider approving the budget from the office of the mayor as he proposed. I don't have a problem with the positions being located in the county manager's, or the city manager's office. So Councilor Rendell.
With that, Chair, I am going to make a motion that we go ahead and fund the mayor's budget with the increase of the 4 called out positions. And if you would like, Chair, I would put on that motion that they are under the city manager's purview.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Can the chair second?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I thought you had asked for them individually. I think by lumping them all together, you're going to create a situation where me specifically am going to vote no, not because I disapprove of all the positions, but just a few. So I think we should continue with the plan of.
Okay, let's take a motion, make a motion. So the motion wasn't seconded, so is there a motion regarding the 2 positions for constituent services?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, prior to entertaining a motion before we get too far down the line. The role of the council is to consider and approve budgets, adjust budgets, etc. But I believe it would extend beyond its role to consider individual positions and vote on individual positions. It's a matter of semantics. You can still get there, but along the lines of the earlier motion or an adjusted motion, it's what, and I wrote it down here, it would be along the lines of voting on a budget that includes allocations for these positions, but not necessarily we're voting up and down on position 1, position 2, position 3, and you're going to squeeze or adjust the budget based on the number you need to see it be, but not on the individual positions itself. So, for example, if the council chose a motion that says, and I'm just using round numbers, I'm not in the budget, I don't know the details of this, but if the proposed budget overall, including 4 new positions, was $100,000, and the council disagreed that $100,000 was the appropriate amount, then it would be approving $90,000, and then it's an executive decision how to allocate that within it. But again, I would counsel the council against going line item by line item as far as positions. And I approve this position and I oppose that position. The trouble we've run into with governing bodies getting into that is it eventually morphs into in next budget consideration, not new positions, but old positions. I want to eliminate that. This particular position, possibly because that employee upset me at some point in time during the last year. I've seen it devolve. And that's why I advise that the board stay within the budgetary authority. And if they want to shrink the budget because, again, semantics, there are certain roles that they don't think should be included. It would be up to the executive to decide which roles are created and which aren't, but they'll have less of a budget.
So the budget is balanced as it's been proposed. So we would have to reduce then the amount that we allocate to the office of the mayor by something equivalent to the number of positions we don't want.
That's within your authority to adjust budgets, correct? But to forgive me, I'm saying it this way intentionally. It's not what you're intending to do, but it's what it could devolve into. Pick or choose between positions within departments. I like this one, I don't like that one. I like this person, I don't like that person. That's where I've seen it go when governing bodies don't stay within the budgetary authority.
Okay, so the mayor and council's budget is, the current budget is $795,000. The request the request before us is 1.2. I guess we're going to need a breakdown then of, because we don't want to approve $1 million budget if that's not enough to cover existing positions that are within the mayor's office. So we need to know, I guess we need the equivalent, I would assume then, if we can't get into.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Rivera.
Mr. Zamora, it sounds like you were just giving us what was advice to caution us about getting into a situation where in the future that we don't get into individual personnel budgets. These are new requests. These are positions that are being transferred from other divisions into the mayor's office or into this new creation. So I think it would be up to us to make sure that with existing positions, with those other situations you talked about, that we don't get into the specifics about it. But with this, I think it's different. And I think what you were just giving us was advice, not necessarily this is the way it needs to be done.
So, Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, one thing that I try and avoid doing is telling any of my elected officials, you must do this. I am providing advice, and it's my recommendation because, again, semantics are important. And if the governing body develops a perception that they have the ability to get into individual positions that are under the authority of the city manager, and picking and choosing who gets hired at what rate, who gets fired at what rate through budgetary measures, it can be quite dangerous. So that's one thing that I'm suggesting too is in this advice, it's the mayor's and the city manager's role to come forward with budgets, and the governing body's responsibility to examine that, authorize the budget, lower the budget, and then how the executive reacts to that. Because playing it out a couple steps, you can reduce a budget, but still there's executive authority to still create these positions anyway by transferring them themselves, as long as they stay within a budget. So I'm just giving the whole picture, but I'm cautioning against a vote that says we approve this position and we don't approve that position as setting an expectation for the governing body that they manage individual positions within the city that are under the city manager's authority.
Understand.
Okay, but we do have the authority to approve or deny expansions, the creation of positions, right?
Against semantics, right? Expansions cause budgetary expansions, and so for
right, but the manager cannot create new positions. Only the governing body can. It's not just a matter of approving the budget; it's approving the new position also. If I understand the HR rules and regs, so the manager can't create new positions.
So one of the things that's beyond the research that I did for this morning's preparation is separation of authority, and the question of how these can be created. I would need to go back and look specifically on the creation of positions. But again, part of what I'm talking about is the ability of the executive to adjust and maintain within budgets and shift positions around to create that. So executive does have some authority to work within the budget,
right,
to shift positions within the executive office.
And that's what we've done with the 2 constituent liaison positions. So technically, we don't need to vote on that because you used existing positions to do it.
Effectively, we've done that with all of these.
And as the mayor mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, what may have muddled things up was the transparency to say, here's the intention with the budget we've asked for these particular departments. Here are our intentions 2 and 3 steps down the line. And that level of transparency has in part caused the debate of, well, do we like what steps 2, 3, and 4 are?
So, and so we could finish the discussion. We could put in whatever motion we want. So for example, let's say we decide not to approve this, you could still fund these positions anyways because you're using existing positions. Because that's within your authority of the HR rules and regs. It says you and the manager actually has the authority to reclassify positions without the governing body, as long as it doesn't result in an increase.
Yes, sir. I think what the city attorney is pointing out is accurate in every respect, in the sense that what I was trying to lay out for the public and for the governing body was the thinking behind the budget, not just the budget, so that you would understand and hopefully approve and support the direction that I've been indicating I want to take in the context of the budget. And itemizing the positions and their roles was really an attempt to be as forthcoming as possible. Under the operations of the budget, as the city attorney is pointing out, we are exposing, if you will, we're showing you what's behind the curtain of the actual budget, rather than simply saying, here's a number. And in that respect, perhaps made things more complicated than they needed to be, but trying to be, I'm sort of leery of the word transparent because it's taken on such, talk about semantics, Mr. City Attorney, the transparency is whatever you make it, I guess, but really trying to be collaborative. And that's the point of what we're doing here.
Councilor Romero Worth.
So just, I guess, two things. I think moving forward, we may need a separate budget for the council, because right now I think we're underneath the office of the mayor, or the city manager, or the general government personnel, right?
Councilor, exactly right. If you know, we've been discussing. It's been interesting again as we learn the new world we're living in. We've really been talking about a discrete entity called the Office of the Mayor, which is a new creation, even in the language. Mm-hmm. And yet, if you look at the way the budget is organized, it's organized under a general management, general administration category, which really is much more the city manager's operation than anything else. And so we're experimenting with new ways of describing things to each other within an old model of how the government has organized its business historically. It is as the document says, there's this pivot going on, and we haven't caught all of our language or categories that we're operating under, haven't caught up with the traditional way of organizing the budget. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right.
So with that in mind, I'm just wondering can we just note that, and I would make a motion that we approve this budget and as it stands, and with the idea that you say we're going to be reviewing this in 6 months. Let's continue to have these conversations and figure out, what needs to happen to further mature in this new world that we're in. And I think we've identified a bunch of things that need longer discussions, but I think for now, I would move that we approve this budget.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it, and
okay,
I'll also
discussion. Councilor Lindell.
I'll also note that the council does have a budget and a business unit number, as per Celeste, and I believe Celeste. But
okay.
I do seconding this motion.
Okay, and this is going to include also the city manager's budget, the deputy city manager's budget, because this was part of that presentation, or an extension of it. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Do we need a roll call vote, or do we want to? Let's have a roll call. Start with the finance committee members.
Point of clarification, it's only the finance committee members that are voting.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, I tried.
Sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
Pass.
Yes.
Yes. You do get.
I was hoping I could just slide without it. Oh, now Now you give us an opinion. I like. All right. Yes.
Okay, we need to get into the land use department budget.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
As a point of clarification, I just want to make sure we've done everything appropriately. On page 137,
Yes.
if you look at the general government summary of lines,
Yes.
it seems to me like you all just approved the mayor and council in the city manager budget. The city manager budget has a couple of the presentations yesterday that you got built into it. However, I'm not certain if you approved the internal auditor's budget, the affordable housing budget.
Yes, in the motion, I included the deputy city managers present, and I think they were covered under that.
Okay,
But
thank you.
for-
Just wanted clarity.
Yes. Okay, so as far as the land use department budget, my concern was the increase in wages and benefits. That was clarified, that it's not going to result in extra monies, for example, for the department to use for salary, for raises or for other items in the budget. The other thing is there was language in the budget that we were concerned about regarding future fee increases and usage, new positions with those fee increases, and the direction was to make sure that that language is taken out of the budget document before it gets published. Was there anything else from the committee regarding the land use department budget? Is there a motion to approve the land use department budget?
Would you repeat?
We had brought the land use department budget back because I was concerned about the increase in wages and benefits from the previous year to this year to, I think that was to the tune of 200,000, but in the presentation earlier this morning, it was explained why we had that change, that increase in this department and decreases in other departments. So, so I'm satisfied with that. And then we talked about the language that we're going to take out of the budget document before it gets published regarding fees, future fees, positions, potential future positions, and we also struck the increase for the staff in historic preservation.
Thank you. I wasn't in the room when that happened, Chair. I apologize. I'll make a motion to approve then.
We have a motion. Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, the land use department is approved. The Parks and Recreation Department budget, Councilor Rivera.
Hold on, Mr. Chair. I know we just voted on it, but I just noticed that the land use director was requesting an expansion and salary adjustment in HPD, and I don't remember if we had.
No, the motion included striking that.
Thank you.
Yeah. But thanks for the clarification. Okay, Councilor Rivera, the Parks and Recreation budget.
Thank you. I was looking at opengov.com and I still didn't see any reference to the recreation plan. Is that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, depending on what you all request for the recreation plan, our intent, once the budget was approved, was to sit with Director of Parks and Rec and make sure that that plan can be implemented within the budget and that it makes sense operationally. Again, that's dependent upon your approval of the budget.
All right, so you want us to approve the monies and the recreation plan will come sometime later?
That's affirmative, yes.
Okay, there is no parks reorganization plan.
Right, Councilor Rivera, it was kind of the same with land use, where we want some of these things struck from the budget book before we publish it, including the proposed reorganization plan, because there is not one. Or we're not prepared to approve or deny, or the manager is prepared to approve or deny a reorganization at this time.
All right, and what's Dude Camp? Dude. which is what's in OpenGov, and I'm not sure if that's a proposal for training or really what that is.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, I'm going to ask Francis Ortega from Parks, who worked very closely with Richard, to explain what that one is for you.
Sorry, it's Dude University.
Oh.
That's all the difference.
Is that it?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, staff. What the Dude Solutions, it is Dude University. The Dude Solutions is the mobile 911 application that will, they're getting ready to finish up the contract right now, and we were going to have it installed on the employees' cell phones. And what this does is it monitors our parks when they go down, how much of the material that's used, like if irrigation goes out, how much irrigation supplies went out, how many hours were spent on it, and that's what that's for.
It's a tracking system for
Correct.
supplies? And what did you call it? A mobile?
It's a mobile 311.
Mobile 311.
And it is cloud-based, so we do not need to have any type of IT to maintain it. It is maintained through the cloud.
Has this been run through the IT department just to?
Yes, it has.
And they're okay?
We've had several meetings with it. We tried to do another one that another department has, which is BDD. They have one, but theirs was way too expensive for us. It was $36,000 a year to do the maintenance on it, and we just didn't have the capacity to bring in another server, have them come down and maintain it every month, get authorization from IT to maintain all this. So this one is basically, like I said, cloud-based, and it's anybody can use it. So it can go to any department.
And what's the cost of this program?
To install right now will be $15,000, and IT will just put it on the phones, and then after that it's just a once a year maintenance fee that we pay of $12,000.
$12,000 maintenance fee?
Yeah, versus the $36,000 we would have had.
But a $15,000 installation and then a $12,000 maintenance?
Mm-hmm. Because they come down, they train each employee how to use it, and they work with IT and also how to maintain.
All right, and this has been budgeted for?
Yes.
It's in the budget. Okay.
Yes.
So just with regards to and I know you don't have to, Mr. City Manager, when it comes to the recreation plan or any kind of reorganization that might take place, but when these things are done without any council approval or any kind of transparency, they usually come back and we get questions about things that are going on. So if there are significant changes, I would hope that you would come back through, or at least have a presentation to this governing body regarding those changes.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I appreciate that comment entirely. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anything else regarding the Parks and Recreation budget? Is there, Councilor Harris?
You know, we did, some of the vacancies that were identified that got shifted to the mayor's office did occur in Parks and Recreation, and I'm not going to dispute that. I don't even know what those positions, they were identified by number, I think 417 and another one. We talked a lot about the lifeguard positions, and what I thought I heard from Ms. Romero, I think, was that those positions, or a number of positions, aren't funded even. It was unclear to me if it was really an issue with funding or qualifications. Certainly qualifications were some of the issues. But with so Mr. Carter, are the all lifeguard positions that, kind of level of certification, whatever may be, I mean, an industry standard, if we need a certain number of lifeguards based on hours of operation, are all those positions funded, not only at GCC, but also at Salvador Perez? And
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, yes, they are all funded, but we do have vacancies.
Okay.
At the present time, we have approximately 5 full-time lifeguard and WSIs, as well as 8 seasonal for the BC pool.
okay, all right. Well, again, it was I thought I heard mention made that in previous budget discussions there were positions removed from they call them the lifeguard contingent. But so, anyways, they're fully funded, and the positions that are funded are sufficient to provide coverage for all pools.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, yes.
Okay.
At the bare minimums, we will be able to cover every area that's in there. And to address your question, we did have one recreation supervisor position, which is in aquatics, that was frozen. But after yesterday's Monday's conversation, we are recommending that to be filled, and that is an aquatic position at the Genevieve Chavez.
And Councilor Harris, I think part of the discussion with the funding with the lifeguards was the amount we fund them at. I think there was a concern that we can't find lifeguards for
Right.
11.40 an hour, and maybe we need to take a look at increasing the amount that we give to lifeguards so that we can attract lifeguards because of the responsibilities and the qualifications. Maybe we're not funding them at a high enough level, I think is what I recall.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, you're correct, because right now we basically hire, if you're a seasonal lifeguard, you get $11.40 an hour. If you're a brand new one, it's approximately $12.41 an hour, and we're finding that other places are paying upwards of $15 to $16 an hour. So I think with the city manager's approval and with councils, we can always, once they apply, we could always offer a higher salary to them.
Okay.
Okay, anything else, Councilor Harris?
No.
Okay, is there a motion regarding the Parks and Recreation budget?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion, is there a second? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, the Parks and Recreation budget was passed. Now, I think the only unfinished business is the discussion that the committee had on the library and additional funding for the library. I didn't participate in that. I plan on not participating in this one either because I didn't participate in the first one. So I'm gonna ask Councilor Rivera to take over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, Mr. Sanchez, remind me why we didn't approve your budget.
So in the spirit of asking for additional positions, the Finance Committee asked us to go back and take a look at the total amount that it would cost to operate the Lafarge Library. And as much as I would love to stand here and advocate for the opening of Lafarge, I'd like for us to suggest that we take a step back. We're in the process now of conducting a library assessment. Lafarge Library has never been open on Sundays. We have no idea what the need is going to be. It has never been open. We're in the process of reviewing proposals and selecting a contractor that's going to come in and do a full-fledged assessment to include an evaluation on community needs. I would suggest that if we took a step back, we let that evaluation come in, it would then determine the need that we currently have for that specific library, as opposed to trying to figure or guess at the total amount that our total amount of staff we would need would just be a guess and wouldn't be very strategic or beneficial for us to try to open at that point. So I'd just like to suggest that we take a step back, allow that evaluation to be conducted, and then at that 6-month review that we could come back with solid information to be able to present to the governing body.
When is the evaluation supposed to take place?
So right now, we're in the process of evaluating. We'll have the contract in place by July 1st, and the time frame is between 6 to 9 months in order for us to be able to get that information. We could, at the point of negotiating the contract, make that evaluation of the community needs a priority so that we could come back within the 6-month period to then present that as an option.
Okay. Questions for Ms. Sanchez, Councilor Romero Worth?
So will your assessment look at the demand for the libraries throughout the week? Because, you know, it was suggested that maybe, you know, Lafarge should be opened on Sundays for access to the computers, and because that's when kids are doing their homework and they need that facility. That might be a higher demand time than, say, Monday morning when, you know, people are at school or at work, and that, you know, instead of adding on to the budget, maybe it's possible to shift resources around so that you're, you know, meeting the demand needs. And I don't know, will your assessment be able to give us some sense of that?
Yes, Councilor, we will. We asked for them to do a full-fledged assessment of all the operations and then the physical plant or the physical sites to meet that 21st century model. So we do have existing data right now that we could speak to the Monday through Saturday, and this information will then be given to the contractor so they can look at it as a whole.
Okay, because I'd be curious about that, whether we need to, you know, whether you need a budget expansion or whether we just need to move resources differently.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Sanchez? Oh, sorry.
Well, you know, I'm very familiar with the library RFP. I know what's involved. I actually looked at the draft on that, and you know, as much as I appreciate Mr. Sanchez's leadership in community services, I have a hard time seeing why we would have to wait for an assessment. I think that it just kind of, you know, it just makes a facility available at a central location in town that when you have 2 other locations that are there. I asked for a specific breakdown of what it might cost, and you know, we heard a round number of 100,000. Is it more or less than that?
Councilor Harris, it's more. It's going to be $181,303.92. That would include $181,303.92. That's going to include 4 part-time library technicians at $12.67, 1 part-time librarian at $20. This is plus salary and benefits. The cost for the security on Sunday that we would have to have on the premise would total that $181,303. So again, I just, as much as I would love to advocate for saying, yes, let's please open the library on Sunday, because we hear the need as well too, we just don't know what the numbers really are in terms of what that would look like. And that's why I had
Excuse me, when you say that what you don't know what the numbers are you talking about the number of people who would make use of it?
Yeah, correct. We don't know.
I mean, you really think that the study is going to be able to extrapolate, you know, what a Sunday usage is going to be?
Well, I hope through the actual community meetings that are going to be conducted, we would hope that we can get a good average amount. We can take the total numbers that we have now and try to do a breakdown. We know that we have approximately 300 users on the Southside Library, but that may not be the same need that would be in the Lafarge as well. So we don't want to take a guess at that.
Just do a simple ratio. I mean, if you've got X number of users at Maine, Lafarge, and, you know, I mean, you can do a calculation. I think it's relatively simple.
But to answer your question, that's the total amount that it would cost if we were going to pursue that.
Councilor Hill-Coppler.
I'm still going to advocate for opening on Sundays, and the reason is the study you're proposing is going to totally miss the timeframes of the new Milagro school that's going to go in there. That school isn't going to be operational by the time this study's done, and it is unbelievable to me that that won't impact a potential opening of the library on a Sunday. Because those students, I mean, it's going to be quite a large school, and it's right next door. So we're going to miss the boat. And I, like Counselor Harris, I don't understand how a consultant can extrapolate data from usage of a library that's not there. I mean, a library that's not used on Sunday. I don't know where they would get that data, unless they sent a survey to all of the neighboring citizens. Would you use the library on Sunday? However, to me, even the 2 points are the school is opening and we need to be ready. We need to service those children. Number 2, I made the point before, Santa Fe High is right next door as well. I cannot believe that we wouldn't be flooded in that library on Sunday, much as we know, and I being one, I'm a procrastinator, so Sunday's a good day. But an even larger picture is the children in our community are centered in our districts, districts 4 and 3. And we have a library almost across the street, which has been there for hundreds of years. I think the studies have shown that East Side hardly has any children. They have all the fun down here. So yeah, the library's good for them, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I believe, I mean, I'm flooded with calls about that library, and I'm frankly ready to say, you know, things I wouldn't want to say. So I just think, you know, it's a small price to pay for serving our children. It's, I don't know that it would be a whole day. I can't remember what the time frame was.
5 hours.
5 hours. And so what's the big deal? I hate another study, and it's just sort of postponing the inevitable.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I totally believe that we should have it open. I did a study 4.5 years ago at the governing body's request to look at the number of kids that have transitioned to the south side, and particularly most of them have gone to District 3, although the other biggest number is District 4 as well too. So I'm not disagreeing at all. I think that it would be great for us to have that open. I just wanted to offer that as a suggestion because I know that we're already working through a very tight budget as it is. I just wanted to offer that as a suggestion.
Councilor Romero-Worth.
Another question about this assessment. So the other thing about Lafarge is that it has a large portion of that building that's not being utilized. I was going to say underutilized, but it's not being utilized. Is your assessment going to look at that? I mean, I know there was talk way back when about putting that to some use as a teen center. You know, it seems like this would be a perfect opportunity to make sure that we're getting the most out of all our structures. And I don't know, will the assessment look at the uses for that building and so that we really maximize its use?
It's going to include all 3 libraries in its entirety.
Right, but this goes beyond a library, right?
No,
it's a facility that's not being used. How can we do that?
Our intent would to have them also assess that side of the building as well too.
Okay.
Councilor Lindo.
Thank you, Chair. I'd love to fund this. I don't know where the money comes from. I mean, it's $180,000. We're just, I don't know where that comes from. I'm happy to have the entire overall library operation take a look at how they can reassess their budget and maybe open all 3 libraries an hour later or 2 hours later, 2 days a week, however they'd like to juggle that. I'm willing to take a look at, but I don't know where to get $180,000 in this budget. I mean, we asked for 0 budgeting. That's what came to us, and I'm just not quite sure how to do that. If I knew where that money was, I would be happy to fund this, but I don't know where that money is.
And I just want to add, if I may, Councilor, that As the positions are already allocated to the specific libraries, we are completely stretched. I mean, we have staff that are doing certain shifts at certain times just to make the ratios for the ones that we have currently open. So to go back, and Pat and I have sat and we've done this now over the course of the last year, and she's been doing this for the last 5 or 6 years since we've been in a significant budget crunch, to really stretch the staff to make sure that we are open and operational during the hours we have. So to go back and do that again within the current personnel that we have would really tax that whole staffing.
Councilor Harris?
Well, Mayor, I'll be curious to hear if you have an opinion on this. I mean, to not figure out some way to fund Sunday openings to support our 3 libraries, to me, we start to fall short of being family-friendly and user-friendly. And I'm serious about that. I think that we should be able, we just went through a long discussion about bringing in 4 positions into the mayor's office. I oppose the motion because I was doing the math up here. For instance, the neighborhood engagement salary and benefit, and it was identified, you know, in the drop downs, was $87,750 for that one position. So, you know, we have found some money in other circumstances to kind of, you know, as we talked about, we started off talking about the municipal court. I have to believe in a budget of this size, there's probably funds available somewhere, don't know where, but I think they could be found. I also wonder, and this is kind of an open question, you know, we have a reserve. I'm not saying we're going to draw a reserve. That's identified as 10% of our balance. But we also have a contingency of $1,647,000 in this budget, correct, Mr. Fush?
There's a contingency built in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at page 27. Okay. This is your document. We're just trying to sort it out. And we don't have much time to do so.
Mr. Chair, councilors.
Yes.
While it is identified as contingency in the budget,
Yeah.
it is actually cash, and therefore can only be used for one-time expenditures to remain within the policy.
Well, I just threw that out there because I, again, think you can scrub this budget and find this money. I'll leave it at that. That would be your charge. If you say that it can't be used for contingency, then you came up with you know, $300,000, $400,000 for a municipal court to make that one right. There's still $40,000 that is being considered. So again, I think that appreciate, you know, I'm very much an advocate for the libraries and what we've talked about in terms of 21st century library. This RFP and the whomever is selected will go well beyond. I mean, we talked about the county and how much they're using the facilities. You know, if you looked at 20%, if you looked at 20, you know, if 20% of our card holders are county residents, and we have, I don't know, it's $4.5 million in the library. That's our budget. You know, there's $900,000. So, again, I'm looking at management to find it.
If I may, I think there are a set of issues here that, since we delved into a discussion of philosophy or thoughtful consideration of whose job is what, I think this is another area where you ended up, Counselor, is right, which is we have a a management team that is designed to respond to priorities, set priorities, respond to needs. The shifting population balance is a fact that we should recognize and plan for accordingly. The different demand on our library facilities or any facilities based on the changing dynamic in the community is something that management is tasked with trying to come up with a plan to respond to. I think there is another issue here which Councilor Lindell flagged, which is not just what are our priorities, but how set are we on a way of making decisions around our priorities so that we really are doing something in a thoughtful way, not in a simply a response to one particular issue of the moment. And so, again, where do we have a structured conversation about the whole budget and about the priorities that are embedded in them as they relate to some of the overarching themes that I tried to articulate? Being family friendly and user friendly is absolutely right, Councilor. It's how I'm trying to structure a way for the city to have a conversation citywide about what we want to be in the future. And I think libraries and the role of the city collaborating with the school district in partnership is really an important one. We've been approached by the school district to do a number of things, and we want some things back in exchange. And that's a dynamic conversation that I'm having with the superintendent and ought to be an ongoing dialogue. We do have a responsibility for the kids in the city who are school kids. We don't have them during the day. We have them before and after the school day. And so that's what this request is responding to. I think there are a couple ways we can deal with it constructively. One is to ask management, and this would be the city manager's responsibility, to ask management to say, take a look, as you have said you've done already, at the way you allocate resources and allocate staff to see if we believe right now there is a burgeoning need at that particular library on Sunday. Would a reallocation of some kind be doable so that there may be less hours at one facility and more at another? I know you do that all the time, but what you're hearing at the moment is a great deal of interest in that particular facility. I think the other thing that I would be happy to volunteer the city manager's time to work on, we've talked about the bike program, and is there a way to find $30,000 somewhere that would up that program? I think it's fair to say if we're talking about $180,000 in the library expenditure, we can simply be on the lookout for either new resources or a reallocation of existing resources to meet that need if that's identified as a priority because of what it says about the geography of our community and being equitable in the way the resources are used. I think it does matter, and I made this point, Councilor Harris, when you spoke about tourism, that we're all in this together. It's not one part of the city against a different part of the city. It's one city. And in this case, the need for Sunday utilization by school children in one part of the city may argue for equity in the way the resources are allocated. And I think I feel like that's a legitimate consideration that we ought to look at. I think that's something that our team can certainly work on as we move forward as a directive to try to be responsive. I do think we need to be, just a word of caution, and I sound a little bit more like Councilor Lindell in this respect. I think there is a dangerous tendency that we need to guard against of, the council and the mayor as a we respond to whatever is put in front of us, whatever it happens to be. Yes, we're in favor of that. And Councilor Harris, you accurately said the other day that leadership often requires saying no in a thoughtful way, or not a flat no, but no at the moment and no with what we can do right now. And I'm not saying in this case that's the right answer. I think we need to put an asterisk in all of our deliberations that all prayer, as the old saying goes, all prayers are answered. Sometimes the answer is no. And I'm not prejudging this particular item, but I do think fiscal discipline and the ability to say no in spite of our desire to be really responsive to community needs is always a part of our elected responsibility. Not popular, but responsible.
Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
In an effort to kind of look outside the box and be terribly politically incorrect, I would suggest maybe, as you discussed, but not in this way, and that is taking a look at perhaps closing the downtown library on Sunday and opening Lafarge Library. Here's the thing, you're going to get probably high results in your study for the use of the downtown library because it's a walkable, very walkable way to get in there and out and just have some fun, whatever people do in there. Now, the Lafarge Library, you actually have to drive to get there, so people who are going to want to go to that library are really needing to go to that library, and I'll say again, the population who's most in need of a library are probably the children, the teenagers, and those who are underserved by not having computer use. I believe that it's much more difficult for them to get downtown, park, pay to park, and then walk in. So I'm a believer in going where, beefing up where the need is rather than just having something open because it's been open for years. But that is a very politically, probably incorrect idea, but why not? I mean, then you can study how many people would really use this library down here on Sunday, and in the meantime, maybe we can find $180,000.
I just want to add, so in 1999, that was our last assessment that was done. That resulted in building the Southside Library because of the emerging need. That's one of the reasons why I had suggested that we use the evaluation. I completely understand that it's not within the time frame. But when they did the evaluation in 1999, Lafarge had been open 30 plus years. It's been open now for 40 years, and we've never had it open on Sundays. And so I'm not saying that it's not something that we should work towards, but I really need to understand what the numbers are going to look like. I would suspect that when they did the evaluation in 1999, that would have resulted in some kind of a comment coming forward and saying we need to have that library open since it had been in existence for 30 plus years. Not advocating that we should not open it. I'm just saying we should be very tactical and strategic in the way that we move forward with it.
Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I find it challenging to hear that we just say we need to do this, which I agree. We need to look at how we provide better services for in an equitable way across the city. But to say, like, for example, because it's fresh on my mind, the rebate program, and say we need to look at the efficacy of that program and why we're funding it and what it's going towards. Yet we don't look at I feel like we're not looking at the efficacy of our libraries, and that's what I'm hoping the study will be doing. That it's looking at, since we're looking at 21st century libraries, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's less staff needed for certain things because technology can play a role? I don't know. I guess that's why we put in a lot of money for that study, that evaluation, was to kind of look at across the board what our libraries are doing, how we can do it better, and if we even need the staff that we have now in that way. Maybe it looks different. And so it's really hard for me to wrap my head around $181,000 to be open part-time on a Sunday. And I'm trying to figure out, well, why does it cost that much? What are the things, other than just what we think in our mind, just the tangible, like this is the money it costs to pay the people to be in the library? I don't know. I guess I was hoping that the study would show us a little bit more about that. Like, do we really need 4 part-time library techs? I don't know. So was that part of the evaluation as well, efficacy, and looking at staff roles and how they can better be served in our libraries and how technology will play into that?
Yes, it was.
So that's what I'm struggling with, and I agree with Councilwoman Vigil Koppler about the need, but I'm also saying that on one hand we're saying yes, we need to do this, but on another hand we have other situations where we're already just saying, well, we need to do a study of that. I mean, I think if we had a rebate, people and being able to use a bus with their car, then they would be able to get to the library. So that's my mindset. So I'm just trying to figure out across the board how we can be more efficient in all our departments. And I hate that we always rely on studies. I feel like staff knows the best. I mean, they know, community members know, qualitative research. But there is this level of expertise maybe we do need. I'm just struggling with this amount. I just don't even know where it comes from. How could 100,000 then go to 181,000? 3,500 a week.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying, there's this imbalance or inequity of what we decide is important at the spur of the moment and what we know works and what we don't know. And so what gets more studies than others? I don't know.
Councilor Harris.
A couple things, so the library study, we only funded about a third of it. Really, roughly 2/3, call it $70,000, was put together by advocates for the library system. They see the need. They took the lead. They saw a need before we did, quite frankly. So. If we really want to break down the numbers, that we should look at the operating numbers for every library and maybe select 2 that are the most cost efficient. We only have 2. Run the numbers. Run the numbers for all 3 and see where it falls, and then let's fund the 2 that are the most cost efficient.
We actually have had that conversation because we're trying to look at the staff. Quite honestly, are very, very stretched. And remember, I've only been in this role for a year and 4 months, and we've done a lot of things in that time. But as we're reviewing the staffing patterns and really taking a look at how can we operate a lot more efficiently, that's one of the discussions that we've had and looking at the numbers in itself. I just want to add to Councilor Vigil Koppler, right? It's hard for me because I wear 2 different hats. On the hat that working with youth, particularly disconnected youth, I know the specific need, and I hear from Santa Fe High kids all the time, or particularly those kids in that community that would have utilized or could utilize the library because of technology. So it's hard for me, for one, to say, let's wait to figure out how we find the money, and then on the other side, well, I'm trying to advocate for our kids to have access to those services. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
All right,
Here's another idea. It kind of carries over from yesterday. So, how many of our tourists use the main library? I don't know. Let's just say on a Sunday. Well, Ms. Hodapp may have a number.
The library did a study a couple of years ago and checked people who came into the library by zip code, and we found that 18 to 20% of our usage during high tourist season was 18 to 20% were tourists. Okay. We are an extension of the convention center because we're open nights and weekends. And people, unfortunately, as they've done in a recent survey, said we were the best bathroom in town. Right. And so we do have a high tourist use there of computers, of materials, of people bringing their children into the children's library when they're there.
Yeah. So we talked yesterday about the impacts associated with our tourist economy. We talked about police and fire for special events. We talked about another category. I'm missing it right now. Here's yet another category that I believe that the lodger's tax revenue stream could support. There needs to be a way to figure this out. We have enough money in this $335 million budget, and that's really what we're talking about here, to figure this out. And I'm serious. This is the charge of management, to dig deep, be creative. If it means lodger's tax, whatever it may be, I have to believe. Or if, help us make the hard decision, or just run the numbers. Run the numbers. Be very precise what it takes to open all 3 libraries for 4 hours on Sunday. and then just only fund the two that are most efficient, cost efficient.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I think when we started this conversation, we had asked for Lafarge to be open for just 4 hours on a Sunday, and that turned into 4 brand new positions. And how did that discussion take place, or how did that decision come about?
In the past, and you've been discussing today already about vacancies and vacancies not being filled, the library originally started out with 62 positions. We are now down to 58. 4 positions were blocked several years ago that we could not even apply for. In 2016-17, 4 positions, again, were removed. We are working on bare bones. All of our managers and directors work nights and weekends to keep the library open. For us to be able to open on Sunday, we have to backfill the positions in the library. We cannot just go out and hire 4 people at $10 an hour, which makes sense. You cannot do that due to the union rules, due to HR rules. Our staff are highly trained on computers. They have to be above approach on ethics because they have access to the entire database. They work individually with patrons, be they a child or an adult. Someone suggested to me yesterday that maybe we could just have a volunteer stand in the library on Sundays. Volunteers, I'm sorry, are not trained. They're not able to use the computers, the security systems, and people want to use the libraries to use computers. They want to know how to use their Nooks, all of their other instruments, to use the databases, to do resumes. How do they download? How do they print? How do they save? They want to do research. Students don't just walk in to use their Wi-Fi. And by the way, our Wi-Fi, we extend it out about 300, 400 feet, so people can use it in the parking lots if they wish, and that's what most students prefer to do. And that's on whether we're open or not. And so what we find are people need that personal library research person. That's why they're coming to the library. They're not necessarily coming just to find a book and sit and read. They'll go to a bookstore and do that. What they want is professional assistance on all of the things that they are working on, including searching for jobs and resumes. So for us to be able to provide that, we can't just bring in 4 part-time people on a Sunday. We have to bring in a librarian because we don't have a manager on Sunday, and that librarian, who is a union member, becomes the de facto person in charge, often at nights and on weekends if we don't have enough managers. So we're looking at a highly skilled staff providing services at all levels. We love to work with the schools, but I always like to remind everybody is we have 3 children's librarians, and the schools have 33 schools. We work as closely as we can to provide support, but we cannot be the answer for everything, even on the weekends.
How about a mix of maybe highly trained staff and part-time staff? You may have to pay the overtime, which would be probably less costly than hiring a brand new staff, and then part-time for just 4 hours a day would be significantly less. Did we look at anything like that?
Well, I think we need to look at our union rules and HR rules about how we can staff. We have 2 temporary reference librarians who are floaters, who cover for us, but they are temporary. At the end of the year, they must be released. And you start all over again with hiring people, training them, getting them into the specific positions, and that leaves a gap for us, again, in trying to provide service to the public. I did want to answer one thing, Counselor. You mentioned, was there a time when the library was less busy? And what we have found, for example, is that on Sunday, Maine averages 478 people in 4 hours. That's just about half of what we do in 8 to 10 hours during the week. Southside has 304 people on average on Sunday. I don't have all of the Lafarge figures, I'm sorry, the person who was in charge of that was not available. However, what we have found is that those are the averages on Sunday, but you have, for example, at the main library, 919, 959, 904, 827 people a day. Southside, it's 413, 423, 450 is the high a day. Lafarge, overall, annually, has 229,800 people go through their doors. 229,800 people. Maine has 288,200 people. Southside has 204,000 people. We are busy every moment that we are open. If you go over, you'll see people waiting outside to go into the library every single day. We don't have a down period. Maybe an hour, maybe from 3 to 4 on Mondays, but in staffing you cannot cut out staff because you think it'll be down. For us, we have often run the libraries on 3 people, which is against all safety rules. We'll have 1 person in children, 1 at circulation dealing with everybody, checking out materials, and 1 person at reference. That's just not tenable anymore. Our staff are unable to handle the volume. And with shortened staff, 4 people, it's very difficult to open our doors.
What time does Lafarge open every morning?
Lafarge opens at 10 o'clock, Maine opens at 10 o'clock. When they put Southside's hours in of 4 hours, the logic at the time among council members was that we would open a half hour later every day to kind of offset it, but it doesn't work that way. We need those people in there every single day to open the library, and it greatly angered the Southside community that their library didn't open until 10:30. The staff have to come in at 9 o'clock, prepare materials. When we're doing 663,000 books, people have to realize someone's ordering them, someone's purchasing them, processing them, getting to a branch, shelving them, people check them out, they come back, they have to be checked in, and they have to be reshelved again. There's a great volume of work being done.
What time does Lafarge open during the week every day?
At 10 o'clock, just the same as Maine.
I mean, Sundays, that would be...
Well, Lafarge would, yes, it would be the same. We would like to keep all 3 libraries the same. It's too difficult working with the public to say, oops, that one's open at 10:30, don't call them in the morning, call us.
I understand. Yep, I agree. I think there has to be a way. I'm not sure that, the request for 4 hours on a Sunday, how that equated to 4 brand new people. I think there's probably a way, like the mayor said, through the city manager to try to work something out. And I would challenge you guys to do that. I know it's tough with everything Pat said with personnel and union rules and everything, but we got a lot of smart people in your division, and I think there's probably a way to figure it out. Any other questions? All right, so we still have to approve this budget, and just got a lot steeper news than we thought we were going to, so but we need to move forward. So what are the wishes of the...
I'll make a motion to approve the budget that was originally brought to us with request that staff management look to find a way to equitably, I'm not going to give them the exact direction of what hours need to be open, but a request that they find a way to equitably have the libraries open.
Motion, do we have a second? All right, motion fails for lack of a second. So we still need to approve a budget, so
Right,
Sir Harris.
right, and so we are talking about we're not quite ready for you, Chair Abeyta. I know you're drifting, but so, I mean, we're talking about the entire community services budget is what we're talking about, just a reminder for myself. So I'm going to move that the community services budget be increased within the library division to amount, analyzed with staff, however it's approached, that would allow a Sunday opening for the Lafarge Library, consistent with the other two libraries. It's just that, in other words, it's looking at management, it's looking, and this is, I believe that rather than try and find the money within either the library division or overall community services, I'm looking at the budget as a whole, the operating budget as a whole, to really look at that in order to find that additional support for community services / library for a Sunday opening at Lafarge.
We have a motion. We have a second. Motion fails for lack of a second. Any other ideas?
It's your turn. It's your turn.
Could we discuss these motions? I mean, can we have more discussion? I mean, is that even feasible to do what you're suggesting? I mean, I guess, you're doing it based on the fact that with the municipal budget, in a crisis, they went away and 24 hours later, they figured it out, 400 grand, right? So why can't we find 200 grand in community services? Is that the kind of the thinking you've got about why?
In the case of municipal court, they found it outside the municipal court budget, and that's what I'm proposing here, is that the money be found outside of the community services budget.
I'll chime in with an idea as well, but this still has to go through to the governing body, which is in 2 weeks, I believe. Is it 2 weeks? All right, so we could task staff to, within 2 weeks, try to come up with a solution and bring that solution, approve all the budgets with the exception of this one, and then at council accept this portion of the budget with whatever staff recommends.
The thing where I get tripped up, though, is that we've got the municipal court at 40,000. We've got Lafarge at, call it 180, 100 and we've got, my little idea about bus passes for 30. It seems to me, we've also said that the council would like to have more support. I don't know, we've approved one position, which I think is not adequate, I guess. So there's like all these things that are hanging out there. I just don't know how we deal with this other than give the mayor more time to do his job and hire the people. We need all people in all the slots so that we can try to figure out how to find all this, how to address some of these needs. I don't know. I'm struggling.
I'm struggling too with this. And to just throw one more thing into the mix here, we did have a resolution in December of 2016. Councilor Villarreal's nodding her head. We did have a resolution in December of 2016 that we weren't going to do exactly what we're proposing to do here, which is to say, well, we want an expansion or we want a new program, staff go find the money. Our agreement was that we would not do expansions without identifying a source of funding. So, I made a proposal to say, within the existing funding, see what you can come up with. But I can't support just telling staff, go find the funding. That's how we operated for a very long time. And it started to take us in wrong directions. So I can't support that, to just ask staff to go find the funding. Thank you. Thanks.
Councilor Harris?
Well, in fact, I mean, this is the circumstance where we're talking about expansions. We've had expansion in fire. We've had expansions in police. We've had expansions in the mayor's office, general government, call it general government. And, you know, so I think this is the appropriate place to talk about those expansions. I also think it's appropriate to turn to management to, as you've done within the last 24 hours, look and see, you know, here's another example. This would be within Public Works. $120,000 for stormwater training. Well, that was a clerical error. It's $12,000. You know, I have to believe in my own experience that with a closer look and really looking at what's there, that in fact, as we've done already this week, that certain funding streams could be identified. I would be willing to support Councilor Rivera's approach, which, yeah, I think is consistent with what I'm saying. I don't expect you to come up with it in 24 hours, but however you phrased it, Councilor, basically approve the budgets for various departments without approving this one, allowing staff to go back and look over the next 2 weeks and see if, in fact, there's a way to fund this. But I think, you know, again, I'm struck by here we have, you know, we're trying to move forward, right? 21st century library, isn't that great? But in fact, you know, we can't support our 20th century library. So, we're, you know, again, I use the phrase sometimes designed to fail, and I think this feels like another circumstance, that we set these expectations consistently at GCC, at any number of places, but really and truly, we're not able to meet those expectations too often. And I also think that if we're serious, and I believe you are, I believe we all are, about being family friendly, I think this has to, you know, kind of, a lot of things are going to circle or are circling around this particular discussion. So that's kind of where I would leave it. So do you need a motion for your route?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then I'll make an effort to do so. So I would move that at the present time we not approve the Community Services Department budget, but that instead we allow staff, both internal to the Community Services Department and City Manager's Office and Finance Department, as well as the Mayor's Office, to look and see what, if there are options, ways to fund a Sunday opening for the Lafarge Library, and to bring those options back in 2 weeks' time, or at such time we consider the full budget. The budget is considered by the full governing body.
Can I can I try a friendly amendment?
Of course.
Can we add the other things?
So let's get a second on the motion, and then we'll have further discussion and talk about it.
Cast the net. Okay. You need a second.
We have a second. All right, now discussion.
So all I'm saying is, so a friendly amendment to look at the municipal court funding and the bus passes?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was phrasing the motion specific to the Community Services Department. Those other departments, or in the case of municipal court, have already been approved, as well as the bus passes, which.
So you're looking.
Where did that fall? In transit, right?
So you're only looking within their only in their budget.
I only spoke to, yes.
Okay.
Because it's not approved.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Councilor Lindell.
It's not discussion, so is that, did you accept that amendment? No. Okay.
No.
It was just a clarification.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Sure. He's probably asleep.
As long as he's bringing lunch.
I think we're on now to public hearings, and I think the fire union representative was here to make a presentation. Mr. Arwood, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, staff. Thank you very much for a brief moment of your time. I can imagine. You can't hear me?
Yeah, you just have to get closer.
I got to get closer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. I can't imagine what this process is like for y'all, but thank you for investing your time in it. My name is Jason Arwood. I'm the president of the Santa Fe Firefighters Association. What's your last name? Is Arwood, is A-R-W-O-O-D. And I'd like just a moment of your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I apologize for missing you earlier in the week. I was actually out, and I missed your invitation, so my apologies for missing that opportunity. I came today just to really express my, I'm just super pleased that the Fire Department Council and the committee was able to get a 6% increase for the Santa Fe Fire Department. We're super excited about this. We've really, all of us, the whole city, all departments have been through some difficult, rough times. And we feel now there's a lot of positive change, and we're super excited. We're super pleased to be a part of that. So, again, we've got a lot of expansion. Chief Litzenberger has worked for a long time to help us open the new station. It's been a really long time since we've had a new station. Station 7 was built in 1999. Others were kind of closed as far as old stations, and new ones were built in their place. But this is a whole new piece that's going to be vital and be awesome for the service that we provide to the citizens. So thanks again, guys. And I know the budget for fire is closed, but I'm just going to talk about some points for the future to think about from the Santa Fe firefighters' perspective. We've got a couple of things that we would like to speak of in the future as far as opportunity you talk about for advancement and changes to divisions. We'd like to see some growth. We've got tremendous opportunity. Last year was 18,000 calls, give or take, combined. And so that's all responses from the fire department. Everyone knows, most people know that 90% what we do is EMS. And so as far as the union is concerned, we'd really like to look at support and ways we can maybe look at expanding our EMS operations unit. We've been doing EMS since 1985, and yet we have a medical officer. We would really like to support that side of the house. And so possible ways the union has thought is maybe looking at the way billing is handled for ambulances. For years and years, it was our interpretation that ambulance billing was not, didn't go to collections, and so there's a lot of money possibly missed that might be able to help these positions. In the future, also, we are super lucky in the city of Santa Fe that we have a awesome fleet division. A lot of fire departments rely on kind of like localized city facilities, but the Santa Fe Fire Department has a tremendous, just an awesome group of people led by Dave Gonzalez, who's our fleet administrator. He does a great job. He and his employees are AFSCME, and but we would really like to advocate, even though they're not our union, that we can find a way to help staff their positions. It's really hard to fill positions over there. A diesel mechanic may advertise for $15 an hour, but yet it's really hard to pick up quality people and retain them without $25 an hour at a minimum. We've had lots of problems with that. So I know lunch is calling all of us, but I'll take just a moment of your time. I can feel it. I can feel it, guys. My Diet Coke, concentration is dropping. So the major thing that your Santa Fe firefighters would like to work in cooperation with the city management, city manager, is kind of some a problem that really affects us. In 2016, our para redefined the rules and the hours acceptable for what they can count for reporting. The actual that we work is 2912, and they've changed the number allowable to 2756. So that means my replacement when I retire is going to make about 11% less than I do. He or she's probably going to work harder, just the growth of the city, and going to have more responsibility just by natural growth. And it's unfair. We believe that this has kind of happened. And so, again, in the short term, there's this 11% difference in pay that those folks aren't contributing. We're also concerned, we'd like to, at the appropriate time and the appropriate resources, be able to make sure that we're contributing from the city side and ourselves as well into retirement. But we'd like to work this problem through so that we can really protect our employees' retirements. And so, anyway, I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all you do. And
Thank you. Okay, so we are in the public hearing section of the agenda. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address?
I'm staff, so is it okay if I make comments?
Sure.
Thank you. My name is R.B. Zaxis. I've been in land use for about 10 years. I've been the acting division director for that same period of time. And I was with the city water department before that, so I'm sorry, I've been having a little muscular problems and it's hard to talk. I wanted to express my concern over the delay of the class and comp results because staff has been waiting for years for some of the results of those previous two studies or this third one to actually be seriously considered and possibly implemented. It's really a morale issue. Several years ago, I started thinking about my own retirement and doing that early because I started late on the para. And my original plan was to do an early retirement, which would be 2 years from now at this point. So I started several years ago thinking about my high 3, which we all think about because it affects us for 20 or 30 years. My mother's 95, so I really could live 30 years on para. I have now decided to resign I just don't have any hope. You know, now I'm down to the 2 years. You know, the 3-year high is, that opportunity is gone unless I decide to stay beyond age 66. So now I just kind of got discouraged and decided to quit now. And I made that decision a couple of weeks ago. And I'm actually glad I made that decision because I didn't want to hold any more hope that the class and comp study would be done for this budget cycle. And I'm a pretty positive person. I don't mean to be too negative here, but trying to express my own feelings about the sequencing of all of that, and I'm sure that I represent the feelings of other staff. I mean, a lot of people didn't even fill out the survey this time because they were thinking, well, nothing was done last time, and so why should we even fill this out? I did look up the salary of the city engineer in Colorado Springs just for fun because that city was brought up the other day, yesterday or the day before. That person makes $33,000 a year more than I do. We're behind, and I know it's hard to find the money, but I wanted to express that so that you get some sense of how staff feels about these things. And that's really all I had to say. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Rivera.
RB, you know, I do want to, before you leave, I know I said this to you the other day, but, you know, I'm sorry that you're leaving. I thank you for your years of service to the city. You've done a great job, and, you know, regardless of what's gone on, I want you to know that you're appreciated by the people up here, and thank you again for your years of service, and I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
yes,
could I just
Mayor.
add one thought? I appreciate your speaking up. I think and it came up in a slightly different context earlier about the role of studies and how to use them, but also sometimes studies are not put into effect. And I believe we do need to do studies. I think it's important to know what we're doing before we try to implement anything, but I think to do a study requires action. And so for the past failure to act, I think that's unfortunate, and it sets a bad precedent, but I think going forward, as a governing body, we ought to, again, make an ongoing commitment to say if we do a study, we want to take action against that study, even if it isn't implemented in whole immediately, but to begin to make inroads where we study something to use the information constructively. And so I appreciate your pointing that out.
Thank you, Mayor. So is there anybody else from the public? Okay, then we're going to close the public hearing. Item 6 is request for approval of the operating budget, but we approved each individual department's budget, so I don't know if item 6 is necessary or not. Because in essence, we pretty much approved the operating, so it's not. Okay. Okay, great. So there was going to be potentially a update on the Santa Fe University of Art and Design. Do we need to do that, or do we want to adjourn? And they're not here. Councilor Rivera.
I know our next step is to adjourn, but I wanted to make a comment before we actually finish up, and that's to thank the mayor, the city manager, the acting finance director, for all your work during this process. It's been, I know you were thrust really into positions, into situations where you had to try to pick up as much as you could, as fast as you could. I think with the budgets that I've been through, both as an employee and then sitting up here, that this went fairly smooth. I think we had some hiccups, some small problems, but overall it was a well thought out process. Thank you to the chair as well. Great agenda in getting this done, and really appreciate all your efforts, and wanted to let you know that before we adjourn here with this year's budget meeting. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Harris.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is the third rodeo, as we say in District 4, home of the same thing. Sorry, I couldn't resist. My name. Off the record. No, I have a little bit of food, Councilor Romero Worth knows a comment that Councilor Lindell's already made, how I get when I get hungry. So she gave me pretzels. So anyways, I thought this one went well. Really, all things considered, went well. And, certainly Bradley and Kent and really all Becky Casper, any number of people behind the scenes, I know had to work really hard at this. And so Andy Hopkins, sorry about that. You were one of the key people. So good job. So in talking to candidate Romero Worth several months ago, just like I talked to candidate Weber and other candidates, now Councilor Romero Worth asked me about our budget, and because she'd looked at some numbers and said, I think she phrased it, our $400 million budget. And I said, I can't talk about that. I can only talk about, somewhat intelligently, the approximate $100 million operating budget. But just like we saw 2 days ago in the newspaper, the headline, $335 million budget. I would have a hard time explaining that number. I would have a hard time explaining that number. And I look at all funds and the documentation we have, but it is not clear to me how our operating budget fits into the big picture. So at some point, when things settle down, we need to really, I think, and Councilor Villarreal and I have had this discussion as well on similar lines. So it's just, maybe if I'm the only one who doesn't get it, then in fact we'll just do it one-on-one. But I think there needs to be a better understanding of how this operating budget fits inside of the $335 million overall budget. And part of that is just to know, kind of get a sense, you know, of how the money flows through. I mean, that's really what I'm talking about here. And now, Mr. Flush, I don't want you to come up with some sort of flow diagram that would be, it'd be a lot of squiggly lines, I'm afraid, because, you know, I look at all the funds we have, you know, and it's pretty difficult. And I would assume that as we're going through our ERP, I mean, I know as we go through our ERP process, we're going to be kind of changing the ways we account for things. And so I don't need to belabor that point. But again, I think the Finance Committee just needs to get a bigger picture. So, and I see some nodding heads, and so I appreciate that. Let's see. Again, I started off this way. I don't want to complain, but we had a higher level of information. And I also acknowledge, although I didn't use it, I know Councilor Lindell used Mr. DeYoung's spreadsheets to good effect. I couldn't quite download it in time and start working it. I'd gotten pretty well plugged in. OpenGov, I think we need to kind of give them some other pointers. You know, it did work this time around. It didn't even, you know, we weren't able to use it at all last year. There's a few things, and I'll talk to you, Mr. Flush, about some things that I think might make it a little bit more user-friendly. Beyond that, you know, I think that you know, I look forward to the discussion we've had, particularly the last couple of days, about how to strike a balance. I believe we really have a great governing body here. The 9 individuals that represent the city of Santa Fe are known as the governing body. But I think that you know, nothing lasts forever. Not necessarily in this group. I'm talking about the next group, because there will be changes. And so I think that this group here, because of who we are and our circumstances in this time, we should take advantage and move and continue to have the discussion about how to balance this out. And I know that this is on your mind as well, Mayor, and so I'm sure we'll get to that point. But beyond that, you know, enterprise funds, I was glad to hear that you got on it right away after our conversation late Monday, so that we're going to hear from Mr. Mumm, our consultant on this, about where we stand in various enterprise funds, and if in fact, if it's appropriate to release some monies into the general fund, I would guess, or that's something we might be able to look at, because we are, you know, I've said it, and I think the mayor's responded at certain times that, you know, we have a, you know, we're living within our means. I believe we're doing that, but we're not living up to the expectations that our constituents have with what we tell them that we're going to do in terms of keeping swimming pools open, keeping heating on in different units. We're so far behind in our infrastructure. I mean, I don't know quite how we're going to get there, you know, but that's a whole nother discussion. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chair. Good job to you.
Thank you.
And shutting me off when you knew it was time.
Okay, Councilor Romero Worth, any parting words? Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I think that I just want to thank you stepping in as chair on this committee. It got a little tougher than what any of us thought it was going to be. We have an acting city manager. We have a acting finance director. I mean, it was not exactly how we planned it to be, but I think that we got through this, and appreciate all the departments. I know it goes into a lot of work. It's an ongoing process. It's not done today. It's ongoing. We look at it all the time. We do the very, very most that we can with the dollars that we have allotted. Everybody up here is committed to that. I do know that. We may disagree on how that happens, but I know that everybody is committed to getting the very most out of our dollars that we possibly can. So I'm appreciative to the rest of the committee. It's kind of a grinder, but I look forward to seeing everybody sitting in our seats this evening. So thank you.
And I too, as the chair, I want to thank the staff and the mayor, because quite frankly, being able to touch base with you at the end of every session was extremely helpful to me, and just kind of to get prepared for the next day. The committee, I've told people before, being the chair of this committee or any committee, really, it's only as good as the committee is, and this is a great committee. And I appreciate having Councilor Rivera next to me, because I always nudge him and say, okay, what do we do here? What do I do? And he's always willing to say, well, yes, no, or you can do that. But this was a great experience. I think there's lots of room for improvement as we move forward, and I think a lot of that improvement will come, Mayor, once we actually fill these positions. But I think we have a good starting point. And I, as the chair of the Finance Committee, I do want to use the Finance Committee for follow-up and to continue this process throughout the year. Like Councilor Harris said, I think there does need to be a session at Finance Committee, is just what makes up the city budget and the $335 million and things like that. And so, but it was kind of a grind over the last 2.5 days, but we got through it. And I'm thankful to the councilors who weren't on the committee that attended, because that their input is extremely valuable and appreciated also. And so with that, I will say one last thank you. Thank you to all the staff, all the departments that had to come in and present. I know that's a lot of work for them too. So with that, we will adjourn.